Good morning, everybody. I see we're all gathered. We are a minute to go, but given we're all here, I thought we'd start. Welcome to the councillors, the executive, staff. Welcome, Samantha. Any guests, members of the public we may have in chambers today. Welcome to you all. Before we start, I just wanted to thank Jeremy for the work that he's done, and to the Democracy team, Services team, for the green documents that you have in front of you. I'm sure, of course, everybody has read in detail the submissions and all that come with it. But Jeremy, to have this document is really very helpful for those that may get a bit lost during the day. Folks, looking for a hard close at 5:30 today, and we can pick things up tomorrow. So we've got a big day ahead, and I'm sure it'll be positive. So I will call the meeting to order. This being the council meeting of Thursday the 16th of July 2020. As always, please be aware we're being live streamed. The video will be publicly available on YouTube. And members and staff, executive, if you could please clearly speak into your microphones, and please make sure that your cell phones are turned off or onto silent for the duration. I'll call for any apologies. I can see that there aren't any. Public forum, there is none. Acceptance of late items, I don't believe there are any. Confidential business to be transferred into the open, I don't believe there is any. Changes to the order of business, there's none suggested at this stage. There are no minutes to confirm. Declarations of conflicts of interest, anyone?
I'm just going back one to the change of
Yes.
order of business. Just to clarify that, because it is deliberations, we sometimes go back and forth and all over the place, because otherwise I'd raise the issue of 10.4, just perhaps the value of dealing with that, because that sets the tone in a lot of things. So I'll leave it up to you to go through it, but that's why I'm not raising it as a change to order, because we usually go all over the place in deliberations.
Yes, and look, it's a good point, Larry. So can I suggest we do 10.1 and see how we go? And then if it's the wish of everybody, we can bring 10.4 forward. That does make some logic sense indeed. So no declarations or conflicts noted here. No deputations, presentations, petitions or recommendations from other committees, which leads us straight into business. 10.1 of the agenda, the annual plan deliberations for 2021. Marty's going to introduce the report, and then I will hand over to Jeremy. Thank you, Marty.
Your Worship, councillors, staff, welcome to day one of 2 days of deliberations. Over the next 2 days, you will have the opportunity to consider both of the annual plans that we went out and consulted our community on. Given the fact that we had 2 variations of the annual plan, we received somewhere in the order of 850 submissions, which staff have detailed and provided feedback and commentary on, and we'll have an opportunity to step our way through those as well. So there are 5 reports in front of you that we will work our way through. Jeremy will guide us, and he's provided essentially a process that hopefully will step us through in a logical fashion. As items or issues are raised that might not necessarily be contained within the report, or we don't have the answers for, we'll put those on a whiteboard, and we'll ensure that during the breaks or overnight we are able to get the information and report back to you. So 2 solid days ahead of us. Look forward to the deliberation process, and Jeremy, will hand over to you to give us some guidance on process, please.
Thank you. So those who haven't been through this process before, it is, as Councillor Baldock suggested, a bit flexible. We do tend to go forwards and backwards a little bit. We do, as Marty mentioned, use the whiteboard. We try and answer the questions that come through as they're asked, but not everything is available at a moment's notice, in which case we put it up on the whiteboard and we'll come back to it later on, and we put things up and wipe things off as time goes through. You've got 5 reports in front of you. The first report basically sets you through what the executive have come up with as the key changes since the draft went out, and some issues that they have looked at, talked through and recommended to you. And then it takes you through the 10 or 11 items which you specifically consulted on. And we'll probably go through those one at a time. The aim of the green piece of paper is not new information. This is simply taking the resolutions from the reports. I've added page numbers so we all know where we're at. And I've added the little bits in brackets to some of the resolutions just to make it absolutely clear which option is the same as the draft annual plan and which option is a change, sometimes up, sometimes down, because with the flurry of activity, sometimes it's quite difficult to understand what we're discussing or voting on. So I'll just try to give a bit of clarity. But this is not the agenda. This is just an aid to the agenda. The agenda is the 180 pages you've got on the computer. So we'll go through that one. The second report then is on most of the issues which have been raised through the submission process. So these are the specific issues where we've taken the what we call the issues and options approach. We've given you the issue. We've given you some narrative on it. We've given you one or two options. Remember that we've given you a couple of options quite often. Let's just say do it, don't do it. There's always a third or fourth or fifth option which you can create through your deliberations, which is do half of it, or do it twice as fast, or do it twice as slowly, or something else. We cannot list all those options every time because the papers would just be yay deep, but it's your prerogative to create another option if you don't like the two which you offered. So that's the second paper. There's about, I don't know, 12 or 13 attachments to that one. The third paper then talks about the user fees and charges, stuff which is largely around the Bay venues. It's most of the submissions on user fees and charges. And it also provides feedback to a lot of the other submissions where there wasn't a direct request for a yes-no answer on resource allocation, which is effectively what your annual plan is about. There are 3, and there will be a 4th one tabled later on when we finally pull it together. 3 issues in there which arguably could have come into the issues and options paper, but they kind of got left into that one too late in the process to change it. So 3 or 4 specific decisions required on that paper. And then 10.4, at the moment, the intent initially was to do all the what's the budget questions first, and then work out through 10.4 how we divide that budget through the differentials and the UAGC conversations. If you choose to take that differently, then that's for the meeting to decide. And the final report on your agenda is the DCs, which again is consequential on the other decisions made. We may, depending on how the meeting goes, ask to bring that one forward. The 2 people who know the detailed content best are unavailable tomorrow. So we may get to 4:30 and say, can we just deal with the DC's report, or we can deal with it on Friday, but myself and Christine have a high level view as to what's in the paper. We wouldn't be able to answer all your whiteboard questions, shall we say. So we'll just cross that bridge when we come to it, depending on how we go through the meeting. Tracy, behind you, will be keeping some attempt at a running record as to where we're at on the decisions, so that by the end of the day, if somebody asks, well, where are we at now with debt and rates, we might be able to answer that. It's an inexact science because the decisions tend to flow into each other, but she'll be doing her best to keep it at a running total. And that's that. I think we're now probably into report 10.1, Mr. Chair, in which case Mr. Davison will take the lead rather than myself.
Very good, Jeremy. Thank you very much. And I guess just to paraphrase that, there shouldn't be anything new in here at all other than what Councillor Morris has suggested. And some of that's not new, but there are some things that add to 10.1 that we will, that the staff are now working on in terms of responses. Paul, thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair and Councillors. So 10.1 is, as Jeremy has outlined, contains a number of different sections. The first part of the report deals with what I will call the base in terms of what's in the draft annual plan. So that's the 4.7% that we went for consultation. Then resolutions cover areas in terms of, as per our revenue and financing policy, we need to have resolutions about using debt funding to cover some OPEX items where they provide a more longer term benefit. Included then is an executive report which outlines recommendations from executive from additional items that have occurred since we actually had the draft in place, and that's included in resolution C. D to F then refer to the capital program and any adjustments that are recommended through that, and then the remaining part of the report, as Jeremy outlined, is more into the the detail of the items that were included in the consultation document. So I just take the full report as read and really just put that open for questions at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Baldock.
Yeah, just on that point before about the order of the way we go, the first part of 10.1, which you've explained, Paul, is things that have happened during the process. But when we get to making decisions on the things we consulted on, I don't know if other members share the same opinion, but for me it would be helpful if we'd already established whether we're changing the UAGC or the differential and so on, because that does impact on where some of those costs are going to lie, particularly, you know, the commercial. We heard submissions from commercial saying, boy, that's pretty high, and it's mainly because of the UAGC as well as the differential. So if we'd made that decision earlier, then when we went through all the individual things, for me it would be easier to rationalise whether that's the right thing to do. But I don't know if other members have a similar view or not.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Paul mentioned the 4.7 being the base. Is that the base, or is that the ceiling, or would you like some guidance in between?
4.7, the way the resolutions have been built is incremental. So 4.7 is the number that's included in the draft document, and then as the resolution's worded, that any changes that come through deliberations will be additions or subtractions from that number. So that's what that refers to.
Very good. Any other questions, councillors? Do any of the staff at this point wanting to make executive comment on any of it? No? Council, just winding back to Larry's suggestion, and I think it was a recommendation that we address the UAGC up front. Is that something that you'd like to do?
Question. So the 4.7 is total revenue, so it doesn't, changes to the UAGC or differential does not affect that number per se. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the conversation around the UAGC and the differential will impact on the distribution between properties and between sectors, but not the total amount.
If there's no support, we can just box on through the agenda. It was just a thought that Councillor Baldock had in mind. All right, so shall we box on? Yep, I'm not sure what you want to do. Okay. All righty. So, Council, we have, as you can see, a number of recommendations in front of us. I would imagine that you'd want to take them letter by letter, serial by serial. Okay. So, serial A is that, you can read it before you there, but it really is around the 4.7% after growth. B of that, as you can read again, talks about the cycle at $600,000 in the Curbside collection for 2021, and goes on from there. Councillor Baldock.
Noting that we will take them in parts, and we don't want to get into the problem we had before we moved the whole lot and then had to undo and remove. But I think A to F is a reasonable thing. I would be happy to move, and we vote on them in parts, and then we start going one by one after that, if that's okay with you.
Just through the chair, where you see on the green sheet, you've got those little dotted lines between groupings of resolutions. Yeah. Those are ones that we thought sort of sat together. So B and C sort of sit together as a group of resolutions, as do D, E and F. So you might want to, and we thought the thinking was sort of there's a level of logic that you'd pass those as a bundle. So you might want to do those in groupings where they're together, and then where they're separate, we thought they were quite distinct issues where you might have different views on one resolution or the other, and so we suggested that might be better taken separately. So that's just as a guide, may help you.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I should have pointed that out. This is and again, thanks to Jeremy for doing that. The clusters that he has come up with there do have some logic to them, and particularly A, taken by itself. So if we could do that in the first instance, which is 10.1A. Discussion on that. Yeah, Councillor Arbery.
Happy to move.
Sorry, just speak out a bit louder.
Happy to move.
Happy to move. Thank you, Councillor Arbery.
And I'll second it.
And Councillor Bordeaux, happy to second. Do you want to speak to this now, Councillor Arbery?
I don't think it needs too much discussion. It's a starting point, and it'll change as we go through the day.
You, Councillor Bordeaux, same. Any other councillors? Councillor Morris.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, through you. The 4.7% is what Council, of course, consulted on. So my personal view is that it is important to consider that when making decisions today, as of course we all will. I'd also like to endorse the Mayor's comments at the Papamoa Progressive Association on Monday night, that he would like to see the 4.7 reduce, and that is certainly something that I also share with him. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Cloud.
Yeah, thanks very much. I certainly view the 4.7% as a base. And as we go through discussions today and deliberations, today and tomorrow, there may be a lot of extras that we're inclined to put in. And to then get back to the 4.7, we're going to have to make some other decisions to reduce that percentage back. So I just remind my colleagues that every decision we make today will either increase or reduce that 4.7%. More than likely, they'll be increasing it. So we just have to bear that in mind as we go through. I'll be very surprised if we end up at less than 4.7% after all of our various sort of add-ons that we're going to be looking at today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cloud. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I don't want to set a pattern, but I'll be abstaining on this. I don't think the 4.7% informs our community in any way, shape or form about the nature of the decision making we're making. We've already seen a situation in Auckland in the headlines in the New Zealand Herald this morning with regard to their rates increase shock, where their residential rates are coming into the figure of less than 4.7. And we also know from our own AP that the residential rates figure is significantly lower than 4.7, and on the other hand, for certainly large commercial enterprises, the figure is multiples of 4.7. So I don't see what value this statement adds to the scheme of things, but if people want to put it on record, that's fine by me.
Very good. Thank you for that. Councillor Bulldog.
Yeah, well, it is the base position that we went out and consulted on. It would be the first time, in my recollection, that we have ever said that was where it has to be at the end. This is a process where we evaluate decisions and we make them based on their merit, and there are occasions in the past when that rate figure has changed, up or down, because that's our job here. So it's a reasonable resolution to just note that this is where we're starting from, and I think we should get on with it.
Got to start. Yeah, Councillor Hollis.
No, it's okay. And Councillor Baldock answered it for me.
Anyone else? All right, well, in that case, I'll put that to you, 10.1A. All those in favour of the resolution as is written before you, please say aye.
Aye.
Can I just get hands held up, please? So it's, and I'm included in that, so it's everybody. And those against? And the abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you, Councillors Robson and Hollis. Thank you very much, everybody. Which takes us to, and I'm working off Jeremy's very helpful sheet here, B and C. As you can read it, the cycleway, the startup, the curbside collections, I beg your pardon, excuse me, and C, the agreement to the adjustments to revenue and expenditure.
I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Can I have a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Salisbury, thank you very much. Any discussion on that, Councillor Hughes?
Oh, I just think that moving from operational into capital makes sense for the cycleway development, and the curbside collection also makes sense. It sounds like a prudent financial decision.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Salisbury, would you?
Nothing more to add.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis.
I'd just like some more clarity around B2 and what the consequences of recording it as a reserve, what that actually means, please.
So through the chair, the costs that we incur on Curbside in the 2020-21 year won't be rate funded in that year, so they'll be spread over the following 10 years. So rather than bringing, obviously we have costs that are incurred prior to the start up of the service, and rather than rating for that until the service started, we bring it in line so that we don't rate until the service actually starts.
Paul, any, Councillor Robson?
Following on from Councillor Hollis's question, the quantum of recovery for both 10.1B1 and 10.1B2, the quantum of recovery, because I think we need to know that. What we're effectively doing here is spreading certain costs over a relatively short period of time, but we are looking to recover them over that period of time, so effectively they will be rated for, therefore they will become op-rev. So these decisions are effectively putting a future rates bill on our community, one for 5 years and one for 10 years. I think it would be helpful if we knew how much we were putting on the rates bill for those two. Is that information available, please?
So through the chair, in terms of B1, 600,000 over 5 years, 120,000 a year in that case, and I'm just seeing if Catherine has the figure for the Curbside start-up costs.
I don't have it right in front of me, but we can keep the conversation going and get back on that one, is that right?
We'll confirm that for the Curbside.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Clout.
Yeah, question on page 32, which is attachment 1. I note there's $1 million going into the ongoing costs and the parking activity in relation to Harrington Street, and then there's a corresponding, I assume it relates to it, $1 million coming out, which is recovery from parking activity balance over time. Can you just please explain how those two numbers do balance out? Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, so it's reflecting of the funding for that activity. So what we're showing in that attachment is the net rate contribution. So parking is a cash balanced activity, so the $1 million a year in terms of ongoing costs is included, but it will be funded within the cash balance of that activity or by debt over time.
So just supplementary, is that $1 million referring to Harrington Street revenue that we're not collecting?
No, it's still an active site, so Nick may be able to provide more information in terms of the detail, but there still are costs incurred.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. I don't think there are, it is, like Paul says, that there's still a live site. We still incur cost. We still have a live contract on the project, so and there is still some physical works to be done. So this is an estimate of what those could be for the year.
Those are relating to OPEX as opposed to CAPEX, is that right?
No, they're related. They're capital costs in terms of keeping the site safe, and there is still some work to do with adjacent properties, etc. And they are costs that I assume, I'm looking at Paul now, that would be capitalised.
Yes, however, there will be some, obviously some write-off of costs that incur on that site, so which in case turns them into OPEX. But again, it funded within a cash balanced activity will mean that we look at the overall net debt position of that activity and how we fund that over time.
Thanks very much, Nick. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, in attachment 1, can I get some more information on the line under OPEX carry forwards requested with regard to city development project museum consensus? And $70,000 of OPEX, which to me, on the face of it, I'd rather go to, say, perhaps, I don't know, Sustainable Business Network and Enviro Hub, $35,000 each. And I note there is a request later on that we've had with regard to funding on a vision based around the Waipa discussion, which I think is requesting so much a year anyway. So I'm asking.
a bit of
Perhaps if I
thought.
provide some background, it is sitting in the city development team, I think. So this was through the last annual plan, the elected members made a decision that you wanted to connect with the community and understand their views and try to see if there was consensus around the future of a heritage type facility. So you put some funding in place for that. There was a specific resolution of council, if I recall, at the time. It hasn't been acted, and particularly through COVID, and so that resolution and direction still sits there to be implemented, and so the carry forward is there to fulfil the council direction. If you don't wish that to occur anymore, then you would not approve this to carry forward. That's probably it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Baldock.
I think, given the request for the heritage strategy, I think Councillor Robson makes a good point that potentially, I think they're asking for 20 or something. I mean, potentially that could be, 20 of it could be transferred out of there for a start, I think, as it's the best way of consulting with the community with that strategy, first of all. But about the rest of it, I don't know.
Thank you. Any other points, councillors? Councillor Morris.
Sorry, are we speaking to the resolution at the moment? Thank you. Your Worship, I wish to move an amendment to C, and the amendment is the deletion of the syntax after attachment 1. And if there is a seconder, then I will speak to the rationale behind why that needs to be deleted.
Perhaps for those that need absolute clarification, what exactly are you referring to?
Okay, so C, as moved, reads, agree to the adjustments to the revenue expenditure budgets as identified in attachment 1. And then I would move the deletion of the following words, which results in an overall increase in the rates requirement of 0.2%, $330,000, page 32. And I believe Councillor Hollis has indicated he wishes to second that.
Yeah, I just need clarification myself, actually. I understand what you want to remove, but the mathematical implications remain the same.
Yes, the reason why I wish to remove it, Your Worship, is because we need to be in the business of trade-offs, and by suggesting that by adopting this resolution results in a rates increase of 0.2% is unknown until we have finished deliberations. So that actually needs to be removed, yeah.
Maybe it may be a better way of talking about a cumulative rates increase, because then you may have other cumulative rates decreases from other decisions that offset. So I think each of these decisions is considered to be cumulative. So they're not, yeah, so if you then subsequently make a decision that something else can be removed, then that would also be added onto it. So
indeed, but we don't mention the pluses and the minuses as we go through. So
you could do that,
yeah.
yeah, so you could take it off, as long as you understand that we'll be adding it on as an increase.
Thank you.
Can I just check, because this is a good point, would it be, is somebody keeping a rolling tally? Because that would take it to 4.72 by definition, and what Councillor Morris is suggesting is that we don't do that.
Through the chair, 4.9 would be the movement on that. So Tracy is keeping a tally, so we'll bring that tally back.
Okay. Councillor Hollis has seconded that. All those in favour of this amendment to the wording, please say aye. Can I just see a show of hands, please? So 1, 2, so Councillors Hollis, Morris, Granger, Kitty, Arbery, Robson. Are you up to everybody? It's unanimous, thank you. That's carried, thanks very much. Which then takes us back to the substantive resolution without that wording. Is there any more discussion on that before I put it to you? Robson.
Question to the chair. Implicit in accepting this is effectively endorsing the underlying decisions, is that correct? Because this is not just acknowledging receipt of a report, this is in fact endorsing the underlying decisions. So for instance...
we are here to make decisions today, Councillor Robson.
Understand that.
Not discuss things as such.
I would like to think, Your Worship, that we discuss things before we decide.
Yeah, well, no, let's be very clear. We have discussed, there's nothing new here other than what Councillor Morris has introduced as part of 10.1. They have been discussed, I would think, ad infinitum. So while there will be discussion on how we roll in terms of the rate and its financial implications, surely you're not suggesting that we haven't previously discussed these issues.
I would suggest that some of these issues haven't been canvassed with our community significantly, and to place them in here when they haven't been canvassed with our community puts us at some, risk of being seen to not be working with our community. So, for instance, I'm seeking clarification through you to the Chief Executive with regard to the Tauranga Moana Advisory Board joint investigation. This was a decision made at the Tauranga Moana Advisory Board with regard to the situation, obviously, with Wharoa Marae and the airshed issue, the pollution issue in the Mount.
With all due respect, you're raising another issue now. You're talking about engagement with the community as opposed to discussion here in chambers. We are here to make some decisions today.
Represent the interests of the community.
Is there a question for the executive in this? The question is, what is your question exactly?
The question is, what's the situation or plans for a consultation with the community around this issue, given we're commissioning this report?
Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship, we've undertaken to prepare a report and bring that report to Council early August, providing some background and the legal framework through which, I guess, the issues at the Marae, this is what you're talking about?
And the group that are acting for the whole of Mount Wellington Sense and asking for the whole airshed issue or the issue to be addressed. It's a very deep and broad issue.
Yes, well, okay, well, we'll seek guidance when we report back in August from Council. What we're doing is we're indicating a sum of $20,000 that will support us through that process for Council to consider here today as part of an executive recommendation.
You, Chief Executive. Councillor Border.
Just a further question, if I can, back to the project museum consensus, that's 70,000. Just to clarify that if we pass the resolution now, that in order to allocate that to other things, because we're not making the decision now about the heritage strategy, that we will be able to, well, there'll be 70,000 sitting there that we can then allocate to other places without having to do a 75% revocation issue within the meeting. Can we just clarify that?
Yes, I believe so. Look, that fund is a nominal sum that's identified to sort of explore an opportunity. You'll be aware that we will be going through this, what I'm calling a streamlined master plan process over the next month or so. That may also lead to potentially council wishing to dedicate some of these funds to that particular purpose.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Robson. And that is? Yes.
That the line City Development Project Museum consensus $70,000 be and removed from the motion and that amount lay on the table, because I think we're in a situation where there is a risk that we do make commitments and then we do wind up getting knotted up and having to revise them because we haven't looked all the way through the agenda. I am conscious, having raised the issue and read the agenda, that there is another sum of money requested in this space, and I think they should be considered in one discussion rather than us addressing one issue in two different parts of the agenda and potentially tying ourselves in knots should someone choose to go down the standing orders route. So rather than do that, if we took certain lines out and we understood, if you like, what was up for debate, I think that would be helpful. If I have a seconder, then I would probably repeat just what I've said. But
Okay, well, I think it's more than, you know, helpful, in fact, and correct to be able to take things out, and things will be added in, as we discussed from the beginning. So if it's your wish to take that out, and if you have a second, we can...
I've got a question before we
Yes,
have a
Councillor
seconder.
Clout.
A question because it might relate to whether someone does decide to second it. That is in the section called OPEX carry forwards, which is not included in the section other proposed OPEX, which is the 330,000. So if someone from staff can tell us what the impact on the rates would be if that was in or out, thank you.
So as it's a carry forward, it won't impact on the rates. However, it will impact if it was to be carried forward to be used for something else, which may impact on another decision.
So does the logic stand that if you pull that 70,000 out, there's no impact on the rates? And
No, but for example, you may use to fund the 20,000 as an example of what it could be used for, which would reduce the 20,000 out of next year's rates of the 20,000. So anything in the next year's rates could come down if the 70,000 is allocated against that.
Happy to second.
And sorry, Councillor Clout, does that help in respect of that for you?
not necessarily, if I'm being totally honest.
Through the chair, for you some examples, if that money was carried forward as per what's recommended within there now, and there were other items that sat within the deliberations process, that 70,000 could be used against those items if they are related items in the same funding, rather than them being additional items. I'm using the 20,000 as an example with the relationship there, is that you could use that, you know, a portion of that 70,000 to fund that 20,000, which would then bring your 2021 rates down by that amount.
That's very helpful.
From a procedural point of view, given that if you were to use this, it doesn't have a rates impact. If you wish to use this for that submission, you may be better to move that as an amendment, which is effectively, if this is what your intention was, you would then pass an amendment that the $70,000 be reduced to 20, and that 20 be applied to the Heritage Trust matter. That would achieve it, and then when you get to the subsequent report, when that matter comes up, you will note that you've already passed a resolution on this issue. That would probably be procedurally a little bit tidier, but it's your call.
Which gives some flexibility to Councillor Robson's point around how this money can be attributed. So, Councillor Robson, did you... The seconder and Councillor Arbery.
Apologies. The reason I'd like to take the money out is because it applies to a certain area of heritage, which I think is important and one that's been long neglected in Tauranga. But there are issues, for instance, around the Okareri proposal in the historic village. There are issues around funding the Monmouth Redoubt work that are all sit in this space. And rather than us cement $70,000 for a particular part of our heritage conversation, I think we should discuss the heritage items together to understand how much we're putting in that space and how much we're trading off. So while I appreciate the staff are working through this from almost last year, what do we do with last year and the carryover situation, some of those things I think need to be pulled out, those sums put aside at the moment, but let's not make a decision at this stage. We haven't had a discussion around Okareri. We haven't had a discussion around Monmouth Redoubt. We haven't had a discussion around, the Waipa model, which I really, really like, and I thank our Mr. Farthing for bringing it to our attention. I also thank him for the work he did with my child's education at Otamotai College. If we can just take the 70 out of this and let it lie, and then we know it's there available to support the discussion later on. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Indeed, and I'll just add, before Councillor Arbery speaks, Tauranga to that as well, as part of the entire linkage between, if you will, the Redoubt or the Elms, through Pukahinahina into Tauranga, that whole Te Papa Peninsula being of great historic value that deserves preservation. Thank you. Councillor Arbery.
I think the logic's been explained.
Councillor Baldock.
I'm not sure the logic has been explained. This was money that was consulted on previously. The community knew it was ring-fenced for, museum, heritage, whatever. And I don't see why we have to take it out. We simply need to put it on the whiteboard and know that the money sits there for application to projects we are going to debate later. This is just an unnecessary kind of playing around with it. We're all clear in our minds that this money sits there, it's a carry forward, doesn't affect the current rate thing we've consulted on, and we will be able to apply it to other requests for funding when we come to them.
Thank you, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this resolution speaks to the wider process as well. We need to be able to make trade-offs. This is not just simply pressing the plus button on the calculator all the way through. And certainly to meet my aspiration and the aspiration of the Mayor to get a reasonable rates increase, below 4.7, we need to be able to make trade-offs. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any other points on this before I put the amended resolution to you? I just want to be very clear that we understand the amendment. Robin, what's that? Sorry. Yes, Robin, if you could please, that would be very helpful. Just one moment, please, Council. Councillors, you'll see that up there before you, the amendment by Councillors Robson and Arbery. Simply that line as you read it be removed from the resolution and left to lie on the table. If it's your wish that we do that.
Well, a clarification with that amendment then, would that not affect C and the 0.2%? Could you just taken 7,000 out?
We have removed that
So
line.
what is that?
This was the syntax after attachment 1.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
Makes no difference to the maths. So, Council, I'll put this amendment to you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, abstentions, and carried.
There wasn't against that.
I beg your pardon, you were against. Thank you. I note that Councillor Baldock was against that. Which takes us back to the substantive motion. Have the seconder and, the mover and the seconder talked to this motion? I believe you have, but I may be wrong. And Councillor Baldock, your mic is on.
Oh, my
Thank you. Did anybody else want to speak to the substantive motion? Councillor Robson.
I think speaking to the substantive motion, I think one of the critical lines in the other proposed OPEX changes is the additional resourcing and asset delivery assurance. I think we know we've got issues in this space. It's one of the larger numbers in there. But I think, there's a message in that particular line about an area that we recognise that we need to, if you like, up our game in. I'm happy to support the motion as it stands.
Just for my edification, up our game in respect of?
Asset delivery assurance.
Thank you. So, Council, I presume that there's no more discussion, in which case I'll put the substantive motion to you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. This moves us on to, if you look again at Jeremy's brackets D, E and F together. I'll just let you gather your wits on that for 2 seconds. And referring you to both attachments 2 and 3, pages 33, 36 and 37. And just a reminder for those that may not have been kept up to play with LGNZ, the 300 debt to revenue was approved and is now available to us. Not that we're going there, but the 250, just for those that may not have seen that in the Sunday Star Times.
Question. So,
Councillor Clark,
questions, I assume, can we take some, I assume we can ask questions on D to E and F. So, in terms of D, we're talking about the capital program. I see there's been no change to the Koporerua Valley development on page 34. So I just want to find out, is this meaning that the proposal put forward by Jerry, who's sitting here, welcome Jerry, and Mark Wassong on K Valley, does that mean that that goes nowhere, or do we still respond to that in some way?
These are the staff recommendations based on known changes. They're not in a response to submissions received from external submitters. They come in the subsequent papers. So these are issues that we know from how the project is progressing based on budgets, our understanding of the market costs for the projects that are underway, any errors or omissions that we've identified from a staff perspective. They are not taking into account submitters, except possibly in the DC space, and so they are decisions for you to make as you work through the submission responses. In report 10.2. So it's, yeah.
Councillor Clout. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Hollis.
In the item that says park developments, page, oh, no, I've lost it, 34.
Page what, sorry?
Yeah, page 34, line item 117. The near enough $5 million, 4.804. In the description, it sort of misses out on near enough $3 million extra dollars. I was just wondering if you could explain the $4 million a little more.
We'll just park that and I'll get some detail for you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gareth. Councillor Arbery, followed by Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, a question on the Maryvale Community Centre. How far through the project does that 870,000 get us?
Perhaps I could answer that. That's our contribution to see the project through to completion, is my understanding, working with the trust. You can come back and confirm that, but
it's roughly a 25% contribution to the overall project. They've still got some work to do to raise the balance of funds, is my understanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors?
Just
sorry, Councillor Hughes, my beg your pardon.
on the bus infrastructure line item, there's been quite a lot of submissions about increasing the number of bus shelters. Does that include an expansion in the number of shelters, or is there a possibility there that we should be looking at that?
So the number that are planned for this financial year is similar to previous years. So we're looking between 12 and 15 bus shelters. We could do more if we put more funding to it. We have also had an offer from the Regional Council to co-fund those. So we are talking to the Regional Council about that, and that could increase the numbers.
Oh, sorry. So on the basis of that, then if they're looking to co-fund, if we were to increase the funding in there, then they might co-fund more bus and a larger number of bus shelters, because I think that's what they're hoping for, is that we actually rather than just co-fund the ones we're aiming for, is to co-fund more.
So I'm not sure that I understand. Are you suggesting that the regional council is suggesting to co-fund if we increase the numbers? That's because that's
sorry to
not my
interrupt. It might
understanding.
pay. I'm just going to ask the Chief Executive to give us a bit of an explanation of what this potential co-funding may mean. We just need to have a real understanding of it, Councillor Hughes, before we jump into this.
So it was probably about 15 months ago that the regional council suggested that they could fund and or co-fund public transport infrastructure for us. And at that point in time, we were working with Nzta to try and unlock their funding, let alone anybody else's. We've managed to, obviously, Nzta have moved on, and now essentially all of our projects are co-funded with Nzta. We don't know where the regional council funding would come from, and we sought clarification for that. It actually may well end up being a further imposition on our ratepayer. We don't know. It could be that it's something that we haven't been able to clarify at this point in time.
Can I just ask about NZTA funding then? So the number of buses, so we've managed to, so the number of bus shelters is staying at 12 to 15, but are we now able to get those co-funded with NZTA as opposed to in the past, or is that a different scenario this year? What I'm trying to get at is that are the bus shelters cheaper now, and if we are able to how can we increase the number of bus shelters that we can apply for in this annual plan, and what does that cost?
Yeah, look, they've always been co-funded. It's just that about 15 months ago, NZTA essentially froze. They went through a process where they couldn't guarantee co-funding for a range of projects, some of which we're talking about here in terms of public transport. So essentially, things have moved on. Essentially, we have the same relationship with Nzta now that existed previously. If we wish to include more funding in any particular item on our capital program, I just wonder whether we don't do that through the submission when we go through the list of submissions, similar to the last discussion we had. Sure. At that point, I think we have received submissions. We have provided some advice and feedback and guidance on that. At that point, perhaps we debate, based on the submissions, whether or not we put more in or take more out, if you're comfortable with that approach.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I had Councillor Arbery first. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll leave it until we get to the bus stop submission.
Councillor Clout, followed by Councillor
Thank you.
Robson.
Thank you. On page 37, looking at capital items bringing forward, I note we've got curbside waste collection, 8.1 million. So we're bringing that forward, but we haven't even decided yet whether we're going to go ahead with that changeover, as it were, to council controlled collection. So can someone please explain why that is being brought forward without us having made that decision yet? Thank you.
Just to explain this attachment, this is a list of projects that we're not bringing forward at this point. They're projects that, in the event the opportunity arises through the year, that we can bring those through. So they still will be subject, in that case, to a council decision before any decision was made.
Okay, so they're not coming forward as such, or they're just potentially going to be carried forward, but we'll be making decisions on those that's one by one. Is that what you're saying?
Well, not one by one under
okay.
the chief. The one you referred to is subject to further reports coming to council. So we introduced this a number of years back to actually give us greater flexibility around the program, so that we can actually ensure we actually have that deliverability up as high as we can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just want to be just a question of just a point of clarification on the usage of language. This is a council managed tender process, and therefore contract once it's not a council controlled organisation, if you will. And I know you didn't put the word organisation on the end, but just for the purposes of complete clarification, this would not be a CCO, it would be a private contract managed by council once its tender has been agreed. Councillor Robson.
Your Worship, the bus line, clarification on whether that includes anything in relation to interchanges in that amount.
Reference, you're at number...
It was the
Li-
line raised by Councillor Hughes earlier. I have a number of questions, so I don't have the line immediately to hand.
Councillor Hughes, what was the number and line item? 33, yeah, 62. Yeah, 62, page 33, councillors.
Yeah, so that is shelters only, no
Shelters, I'm
interchanges.
just checking. I have a number of questions, Your Worship. With regard to the BVL new capital,
Where are you, please?
okay, sorry, I should have marked these. I just
If it's BVL, presumably...
329, sorry, 327 on page 35. You go to the right-hand column, there's a...
As you can't find it, we're on page 35, line item 327.
So there's 1.3 in the dollars column, and if you look at the right-hand column, it shows the three components that add up to that, which is one at 1.1, one at 0.1, and one at 0.1, which adds to 1.3.
Well, as we can see, the lion's share by some significance is the Greaton Pools. And you had further questions? Councillors, any other points before we go to the substantive? Councillor Bordock, I sense your...
You sense my frustration? No. Yes, I'll move. I'll move D, E and F, and then we'll wait and see what amendments we have coming.
And by Councillor Clout. Thank you very much. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Bordock?
No, really. I think it's been explained by the staff. These are things that are not part of the real debates we're going to have later. But questions are welcome because we do need to clarify things. So.
Indeed. Councillor Clout.
No, I think it's all been said. We've got obviously some projects which give us flexibility down the track if we, in terms of capital items, and then we also noting in E that our ratio of debt to revenue is still going to be under the 250%. So happy with that.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any other comments? Councillor Robson. Councillor Morris.
I'd like to move an amendment, Your Worship, and this is in the same spirit as the earlier amendment. This is about parking particular lines, because I believe there may be some appetite for subsequent discussion or trade-off, particularly to keep us inside the heading. So the first one I'd like to move is that we let the line relating to city centre streetscape and the associated amount lay on the table for future discussion.
And your line item you're referring to now, Councillor Robson?
City centre streetscape, I think the number is 113. Level of service 12 million.
Councillor Arbery.
Just a question, how much of that is committed that we can't change?
Look, we've spent some money on various consultants and design work on that, but the large proportion of that is unspent and uncommitted.
The Bulldog.
Did I have a second?
Is that the only amendment he's proposing at this time with the line items, or are you doing them one at a time?
Just from a staff perspective, there is the one outstanding matter that Councillor Hollis asked, so until we've answered that, you might want to, we just need to answer that question as well.
Councillor Hollis.
I'm happy to second, but would it be equally prudent to leave that line item that I'm talking about on the table until, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I've got an answer for that. It's a relatively long list of projects, so in addition to the ones that are detailed there, the Forester Drive Esplanade, there's Lake Park Irrigation, there's Gordon Carmichael Reserve work, there's Tuihana Reserve Play, you know, there's probably 15 to 20 things in the list that make up that missing 3 mil. I'm happy to cut and paste this and send it through to elected members.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I don't think it's going to be a major issue, but it'd be cool just to get good understanding on it.
Yeah, I can do that as we work.
I'll second the amendment.
Thank you. I just have a question of clarification from Nick, if I may, in respect of Elizabeth Street. As I understand it, about $3.5 million of the proposed expenditure is required work underground by way of piping infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. That work is required at some point in the near future, not necessarily in this financial year, but if we're disturbing the surface, obviously it's to be done simultaneously.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that figure. Thank you very much.
The timeline for that is expected. It's expected to be done within the next half a dozen years. I think 5 or 6 years, something like that.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's very helpful. Councillors, we have Robin. Have you got that so we can see what the amended amendment is? Thank you.
So if I'm anticipating what John will do in the future, can you just tell us what that line item would be if council decided to change its mind and go with the consulted do minimum upgrade as opposed to the moderate upgrade that we passed a few weeks ago?
We'll just put that on the board and come back with an exact amount.
What we can do is actually bring out the old report and share that with you.
Mr. Robson, do you want to speak to your amendment?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, look, I appreciate this. Everyone needs a chance to consider these things. These are big decisions, and any decision that we literally set in concrete is a decision that's going to impact ratepayers for the next 40 years. I think that's a really important point to bear in mind. Every decision we literally set in concrete will impact our ratepayers for the next 40 years, perhaps even longer. The issue here is that I'm conscious that there's a raft of submissions made by our community that we need to consider. It will be disingenuous to get to a point where we consider those things having set ourselves no headroom to actually implement them. It would negate the whole purpose of the process of consultation and listening to submissions. So what I've done in the time that I've had available to me is gone through and canvassed with colleagues those projects where I think we might be able to find some movement and there may be a need to reconsider or make some trade-offs that possibly collectively we might decide are best for our community. This is one of those items that I believe some of my colleagues, in the light of hearing submissions, may be prepared to revisit at some level. I don't know what that level might be. So I'd just like to have that item in. With regard to the earlier question posed by Councillor Baldock, yes, I will have another amendment, at least one other. I like to keep the topics separately so we don't wind up trading off between issues. But I'm trying to build up some flexibility for the discussion further down the day. If we don't do that, then I think the subsequent discussion becomes fraught and somewhat fractious. So the amendment is that that line, effectively, and the associated money lay on the table, and we'll pick it up at the appropriate point.
All right. Thank you, Council. Robin, have we... Councillor Hollis, do you wish to speak to this amendment as seconded?
No.
You?
Question before I speak about it. Does this lying on the table, as the amendment indicates, have any impact whatsoever on whether we could address issues and submissions later or not? To the staff, please.
My sense is that Councillor Robson's position, I think, is an appropriate one. It would be helpful to identify those issues that may be contentious and or debated or may change. To identify those now, we could pass the rest and then through the submission process address the issues one at a time that have been raised through this current capital program process.
I may just get a supplementary. If my question was, will it still get revisited? Is there potential for it? I think it should be dealt with. It's been around since it was passed. But even if we lay this, or even if we did not lay this on the table now, if this amendment was defeated, is there still going to be opportunity for it to come up again? Because people do not seem to be prepared to accept the majority view of council.
Well, there's always that opportunity, yes. Yeah.
Speak against the amendment, if I may, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I've already mentioned it a bit in the question, but you know, this is something we resolved on May the 19th, and I recall submitters in the chamber during the submission process saying that one of the most important things we do as a city in terms of redeveloping the CBD is the messages we send to the community, to the private sector who partner with us for this. And to revisit this Elizabeth Street decision right now, I think, is sending entirely the wrong message. And all I can do is urge those councillors who supported it on May the 19th and have had considerable positive feedback from people who believe it was the right thing to do, and not those from other parts of the city, perhaps, who have it in their intentions to undermine it, to stand firm and vote now and defeat this amendment, even if it may come again in the course of the next 2 days. It's a very important signal that we are sending to the development community and to those who are hanging on, really, within the CBD, hoping for the redevelopment that can only come when we partner with experienced developers to rebuild our CBD.
You, Councillor Baldock. Councillor Hughes, followed by Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I think this is my first annual plan process, and I think it's what happened with Elizabeth Street is that we tend to take things in isolation, one thing at a time, without looking at a holistic view of what is going on in our community, what the feedback is, what our options are. Now we have the opportunity here to really look at things holistically, and I'd like to throw that back in the hat to look at things in terms of a holistic view on what our community is saying they want for our CBD and for our the rest of the options in our city. Thanks.
Councillor Hughes. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, effectively echoing what Heidi's just said. There's other things that I care about more than Elizabeth Street, and if it takes potentially balancing some costs off Elizabeth Street to get some of these other projects over the line, to get colleague support, then I think we should let it lie on the table and come to that decision later on.
You, Councillor Kitty.
Yeah, again, I use that word echoing because it's a beautiful word. I'm also really pleased that we're having a look at some of this. We have heard a lot from our community recently, especially in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Again, I am new to this and learning every single second of the day. I'd like to say that I'm really pleased that we can relook at this for the sake of our community, and we are listening, we are hearing what you're saying.
Councillor Cloud.
Yeah, I'll be voting against the amendment, but it looks like it may pass, and in which case I'd like to know what the OPEX implications are. In other words, if we're saving a few $1 million on CapEx, what the flow-on saving is in OPEX, because we will need to revisit it. I mean, if this amendment goes through, clearly it's lying on the table, which means we're going to have an opportunity to look at it further down the track, and that would be one of the answers I'd like to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Granger.
Yeah, just my tuppence forward. Absolutely support this, and for me, simply this is $11 million on Elizabeth Street. Ridiculous.
I'm assuming that no one else wants to speak, but I just wanted to say that I'll be speaking against this. Having also, to Councillor Kitty's point, talked to many members of the community, there is a resounding view that they want confidence. And as you know, the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Baldock and I were at the opening of the Latitude Apartment. 3 developers said to me there that they are desperately looking for confidence in this council, and they fear they have none. They fear that in the next triennium that everything will change again, and it may well do. And that's the democratic right of the citizens of Tauranga. However, they themselves are looking for confidence. We have in the Farmers Building one of the best in New Zealand, not just in Tauranga, but in New Zealand, and they've invested in this city. And given the $3.5 million of works that needs to be done under the ground, which has to happen, as Nick said, in the next 5 or 6 years or so, we miss a huge opportunity to meet what I know the farmers would say is a moral obligation to them, and they have said it to the people that met them just very recently, the 2 councillors, words to that effect, and at the same time beautify a part of what can be.
Having been one of the 2 councillors invited by PR to meet with Brett Nichols, that statement was not made in that conversation. That statement you assert was not made in the conversation that Councillor Steve Morris and I had at the invitation of Blink PR with Brett Nichols and a colleague.
Thank you for the point of order, which is accepted, of course, but I have heard from Brett that that's exactly what was said. So thank you very much.
Point of order, Your Worship. Seek leave to give personal explanation. I also was at the meeting and I concur 100% with Councillor Robson's comments.
Thank you. Well, I'll change my tack then and just continue on to say that we aren't giving confidence to any of the developers who are critical. And the other parts of the private business sector, and in fact the social sector, on relying on our decision making, which has been at best ad hoc over a number of years, a number of trienniums, but most particularly the last one. And we have an opportunity to change that today. We have an opportunity to begin the process of what is called by our team here, beautifying, streetscape beautifying, or inner city beautifying, a city which is in dire need of it, which will in turn attract development into the city. Because what we're trying to do is to attract people to live in downtown Tauranga, to revitalise the ghost town, as it's been described by the media, that it has become. It hasn't become that over this last 8 months. It's been becoming that over the last number of years. So I will certainly be voting against this amendment, and I encourage others to honour what I believe is a moral obligation to one of New Zealand's best developments. Are there any other comments? Thank you. In that case, I'll put the amendment. Can we just highlight that? Yeah, thank you, Robin. To you, all those in favour of the amendment, please say aye. If I can see a show of hands, please. And against? And the amendment is carried, which takes us back to the substantive. Councillor Robson.
Have another amendment, Your Worship. Similar principle. It relates to attachment 3. If I get a seconder, obviously I will speak to it. I will not ask questions, so I get 3 chances at speaking to the topic, because that would be an abuse of the privilege provided to me by standing orders. And it is that we do the same thing with regard to the visitor information centre amount of 4.5 million, the Mount Visitor Information Centre, if that could be removed from attachment 3 and lay on the table.
What page and line item, please?
This is the attachment 3. There's no line number, so it's easy for me to find, but it is a large number. It's 4,503,000, Mount Visitor Information Centre. And I understand from colleague that that would have some implications for the earlier attachment on line 400, but certainly I wanted it taken out of the happy to speak.
We
to
found it,
if I
page
get a second.
37. It's, I don't know, 10 down or so on that page for those that can't find it. Mount Visitor Information Centre, 4.503 million. Councillor Baldock.
Do I
May
have a
I
seconder?
ask a question?
I have a seconder. Okay.
Moved and seconded. May I ask, well, you can speak to it first before.
No, fine.
This, as was explained before, were the items that are identified as a possible bring forward. So can we have understanding as to how this is being parked? It's already sitting there in the long-term plan.
Yeah, through the chair, there's two elements to this particular one. One is the bring forward, which that would be just removed from that delegation, so we wouldn't have that delegation to bring it forward. But the other thing to refer to is line 400 actually has an amount of $450,000 in for the Mount Visitor Information Centre, so that would need to be considered as well.
Just supplementary, if I may, just to clarify that. So the actual amount that might impact on our decisions today with the annual plan is the 450 in the previous attachment, is that correct?
That's correct. So at the moment, if line 400 would mean 450,000 would actually be included in the budget. Staff would then not be able to bring forward any amount from the 2022 year in the event and that would still remain in the 2022 year. So it would actually be a conversation for the remainder through the long-term plan.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Paul. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, just a process question. There are other line items, particularly the bus infrastructure, where I'd be keen to see more spend so we can get some more bus shelters. Would it be helpful for staff if we put those on the table as well?
We'll deal with those through submissions. So as we work through the 800 submissions, when we get to those submitting to see more bus shelters, we can have that conversation then and include them at that point.
Get to the end of the submissions and you feel there were other matters that were raised that the staff didn't pull through, like we've done our best to find all of the things in submissions, but very short time frame and a lot of submissions. There's an opportunity for elected members to raise any other matters, and we would try to gather those up, we'll whiteboard them, and then you could move motions to resource up or down any of those as well. So that's all there for you to, so if we take the guide and work through what's there, if there are any other remaining matters at the end, we'll deal with those all as a bracket, if you like.
Christine, Councillor Morris.
Happy to speak to the resolution, but I do give way to the seconder and, in fact, the mover.
Would the mover like to speak to the resolution?
Yeah, absolutely. This one here, I'm a bit clearer on my rationale for moving it. I struggle to see the value, and certainly the value of bringing it forward. I think it needs to be revisited in the LTP. I would not like to see us under delegation bring forward or spend money in this space at the moment. My biggest concern with this project is we're creating a very nice gateway. It's called an visitor information centre. Well, most visitors nowadays don't pick up pamphlets in a physical building. I think there are other things bundled in here, but also my concern is having something for people to actually visit. And in mind here, for me, is Omanawa. And again, having read the agenda, I've looked at the CapEx requirement on Omanawa, and I acknowledge that it's bigger than we originally budgeted, and I'm looking in the budget again for these trade-offs. And for me, the shiny doorway to nothing is easily traded off for a virtual doorway to something as wonderful as Omanawa Falls. And I will declare a minor interest. My name has been put forward as part of a group to work on that project, sort of internally. I sort of have a slightly vested interest, I suppose, but that's the driver for this. If we could put it to one side and provide some space possibly for the discussion around the capex for Omanawa, that's why I'm doing this.
Just for clarity, vested interest in what respect?
In the sense that I'm one of two councillors that it's been suggested work in this space on this project. So just so if anyone says, you know, do you have a connection with the project? Yes, it has. My name is one of two councillors that have been recommended to work in the Omanawa space. Nothing pecuniary, obviously.
Councillor Kitty. Seconder for this? Did you want to speak to it? Thank you. I think Councillor Morris, you wanted to...
Thank you. Councillor Robson took the words right out of my mouth, but it's got nothing to do with meatloaf, I do assure you. This is again about making trade-offs, and I personally... oh, there's a bit of noise up there. I personally have... Thank you. Yeah, no, I personally have a great interest in the Omanawa project, and if I'm going to press the big fat plus button in terms of the ratepayers and residents calculator, then I have to have the courage to perhaps press the minus button in this case. And Councillor Robson's comments around, you know, in the third decade of the 21st century, having a place where we can give out pamphlets, and I know it's wider than that, but give out pamphlets to people arriving in Tauranga. We need another fantastic tourism offering for people to go to, and that is far more important than the gateway. So I do believe the gateway is something we need to consider, but through the long-term plan, and we need to do it strategically in the light of the changing world we live in, not just the post-COVID world, but the changing world we live in and how people get their information. That needs to be considered through LTP, but yes, I think this is a trade-off that we need to make, and like I said, you know, if you have the courage to press the big fat plus button as I do on Omanawa, you have to have the discipline to press the minus on some other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was going to say, I support this too. I think it's, Councillor Morris is absolutely right that we lack we lack tourism opportunities at the level that Omanawa will bring. I think it's a fabulous idea. And the gateway, while nice to have, I totally agree that it's probably not the right sort of gateway in this day and age, and I think we can do better, ideally at the wharf, as opposed to not at the wharf. That's a whole other discussion point, and Councillor Morris is right that in the LTP we can discuss that, but Omanawa Falls and a number of other opportunities of that sort I think are really before us, and we have a real opportunity to change the tourism landscape, the domestic tourism landscape of Tauranga as a consequence of our thinking in respect of this. So I will be supporting this amendment. I think it was Councillor Clout, followed by Deputy Mayor Salisbury, followed by Councillor Baldock, I think. However, before all that, Christine had something to add.
Just if you also wanted to remove the 450,000 from the 2020-21 budget, you'll have to add to that amendment, because at the moment all that amendment does is take away the delegation for the carry forward and would leave in the current year's budget expenditure, and you effectively, by doing that, you're allowing or approving the project to proceed in the next financial year. From the discussion, my understanding is that's not what you want to do, so you'll have to add to this amendment if you have to do that. Okay.
And
that takes the 450 out. Yeah.
Just one question, clarification, additional, just before we go to the other, just on this. There was 900 million, I think, of PGF funding. Is that, and that will be, of course, we've lost that as a consequence of this decision.
Well, that's correct. Council just need to be aware that we are, we have been under some time frames with Ministry of Business, Innovation and Enterprise. So it's likely that it's likely that we would lose that. But they just need to be aware of that. And I realise at this stage you're just voting to set this aside, put it on the table. We can perhaps come back to you at the time you debate it with more information in relation to that.
Right, thank you. So we had Councillors Clout, Deputy Mayor Salisbury, Councillor Baldock in that order. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm quite comfortable in supporting this amendment, only because I believe there are some other challenges with this whole project, which I'd like to think were going to come to us as well, so that we can look at the full story when it comes to deciding this once and for all. So I'm quite happy at this point to let it lie on the table, and in worst case scenario would be seeking to discuss this further in the LTP discussion, but I'd like to get some information before that if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Salisbury.
Yeah, I guess I'm probably echoing a lot of what's been said. I support this also, and I think not necessarily because one is more important than the other, but I think the timing of a visitor centre at the Mount with the cruise ship season as it is right now, I think it's a timing issue as opposed to one being more important than the other, and it does give us the opportunity to find something that works better for us, I guess, with technology that we have today.
You, Councillor Baldock.
Probably won't be surprised, there's no echo from me, but I've heard a number of speakers talk about a trade-off. There's no trade-off here because we're dealing with an LTP allocation, which we won't be dealing with for another year. There is the amount that potentially could have been used in further investigation of this 540 or 640, but to do that we may lose 900,000. I don't know how that makes good sense in behalf of the ratepayers. But in terms of the Amanawa Falls project, of course it's got huge potential, but it also has a long way to go. And the plan in front of us today, I hope members are not thinking that this is the plan. What we have agreed to is to work with Nzta and those of us who were out there for that meeting a few weeks ago, had a wonderful time, but the challenges in developing that as a tourist destination are still fairly strong. And I doubt that it will be something happening in the next year. It can be an LTP discussion and there can be trade-offs then. But my understanding from having visited the marae and also being out there that they do not want, Ngāti Hangarau do not want people swimming in that waterfall, and that is actually right now the main reason why droves and droves of freedom campers and tourists want to go there, is to plunge into the waterfall. So don't be deceived by the master plan in front of you. There may be, it may be where we get to, but we must do so in partnership. And so I think we're sort of seeing that we can perhaps grab some money from somewhere else right now and do something we may wish to do, and we're actually barking up the wrong tree. We should be sticking with what is already in the LTP. Tourism will come back, ships will come back, and we do need to be pursuing a place for them to be welcomed into the city, as well as those who drive into the city. I don't accept that no one ever goes to a visitor centre anymore when they go to a city.
Thank you very much. Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you. Very short it will be, and simply this, I'm certainly supporting the amendment, and I think Councillor Robson's point as regards to the front doorway, yes, it's good to have one, but certainly not a shiny gold-plated one. Simple as that.
Very good. Thank you very much. Councillor, so I'll put the amendment to you. Robin, again, can we just highlight so we...
CJ or Paul, can you just verify that I've got that correct? I understand was moved. So what this will do was remove it from the carry forward list, which means if you wanted to change that, you need 75% to approve, and that the 2021 CapEx item is parked. We'll put it on the whiteboard for you to come back and to consider whether you want to include or exclude that later on in the deliberations.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
That captures the intent as I understand it, but it's actually amending two different resolutions. The first bit amends F, and the second bit amends D. But we can tidy that up later on, as long as we all understand.
Indeed, thank you very much, Jeremy. That's very helpful. Councillors, I'll put the amendment to you. All those in favour, please say aye. Can I see a show of hands, please?
Aye.
And against, Councillor Baldock, and I'm for. Yeah. Very good. Which brings us now back to the substantive motion. Councillor Arbery.
Well, if we're talking about trade-offs, I'd like to move an amendment to lie on the table the park and ride strategy, or park and ride implementation that's in the bring forward list of projects. It's on page 37. Park and ride activation. Yeah, just discussing it quickly. When that was brought to us by staff, the report showed that this wasn't going to work, and I think elected members overruled staff decision. So for me, this isn't a high priority item. I'd much rather see some capital put aside to Kāinga Tupu, maybe for the combined services hub, doing some design work, and potentially some capital investment in the community centre, and similarly for balancing other issues such as, Elizabeth Street, potentially setting some of that money aside for capital works associated with Kāinga Tupu.
I think, was there a second? Thank you, Councillor Morris. For discussion, right, thank you. And did you want to speak to this now? Yep, thank you. Councillor Baldock, I think, followed by Councillor Cloud, I think.
I just have to ask another question, please, because these amendments are being put forward to take things out of this program identified to bring forward a portion of the 2022 budget as things we can trade off into this discussion today on annual plan. Can we please have a clarification that is that an actual fact a trade-off, or this is not money we can use?
On the brought forward list, that will simply be that those projects will remain in the 2022 or later year. The only things that will allow money to be reallocated will be off the substantive list in attachment 2.
So if we did then want to add something to some other project that's going to impact on rates. Thank you.
So sort of the history to that is that quite often staff would include budgets, projects in the budgets, thinking that it's likely that there might be some need to do something. So something like Park and Ride, that the council might say we want to investigate something, and because there would be no money in the budget, it couldn't be done. So what we said is, rather than everybody budget and only a very small proportion of those projects potentially actually occurring, create a bring forward list so that if we do wish to proceed with those, or there's opportunity to proceed with them, then they could be brought forward, but they're actually not included in the debt envelope and the funding for the upcoming year. So it was really more a level of flexibility. Some of them are all subject to elected member decisions, so and wouldn't proceed like the Curbside unless there was a council resolution to proceed.
Just a question, is that one subject to a council decision?
Can I just speak to that? So we've tried to identify park and ride locations. We haven't been successful on identifying appropriate ones. In the event that we did, that would then enable us to bring that funding forward. In my view, we would bring this to council as a decision to purposefully do that. So,
yeah. Well, I'm happy to withdraw.
You're happy to
withdraw that.
Councillor Morris, where does that leave you? And Councillor Hughes, thank you.
Just one question on that as well then. If that's sitting there for park and rides and we wish to pilot something different than park and rides, like mobility as a service, does that then enable that kind of flexibility, or is it just sitting in there as park and ride?
Yeah, well, I think, again, if we were to spend that money or propose to spend that money on something other than park and ride, we'd bring a report to council and have that conversation at that point.
There's flexibility to do that at that point.
Just to clarify, from a funding source perspective, though, you're likely to be in an OPEX space if you're talking as a service. So it would be a different funding conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, so where are we with this? We have the amendment. That's been agreed. We've got the substantive. Yeah, there are no other amendments. We're back to the substantive motion. Thank you. D, E and F, as you see in the brackets there. Council, I'll put that through. All those in favour of the amendments D, E and F, accepting the amendments which have been agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. Do we need a break? So it's 11:04 by the world clock in New Zealand. Can we meet at 1:15 again? Is that okay? Just for now, grab a cup of tea. Okay, folks, I think we're almost all here. We are on to G1 through 12. These are the OPEX budget considerations that we have considered previously. So if we can whip through them one by one, that would be appreciated. This is pages 12 and 13 for G1, and going sequentially really to page, where are we, 12, 25, 28 following that. Yep. So at the moment we're on pages 12 and 13 for G1. So G1 through 12, one at a time. CJ, can I ask you to make a comment, please, to start things off? Thank you.
Just go back and just tidy up the whiteboard parked items. So there's 2 that we asked about costs, and the other one you did talk about the museum with the 70k. We've just done some further work. The advice I gave was quite correct. So what we were proposing with that 70k was a carry forward to use it for the master planning of the Willow Street site. If you didn't approve that carry forward, because the original was around trying to understand what the needs were, and that was linked to the development of that civic precinct, including the potential of a location for a cultural museum. So we had proposed to carry that forward for that purpose. If you choose not to, then you will probably need to reallocate some other funding to enable the master planning to proceed. So that's what that one was about, and Paul will cover the other 2 parked items, which was the question about the Curbside startup costs, and the other question was around the Elizabeth Street OPEX in future years.
Sorry, just to clarify then, you're saying that that $70,000 would be used for the master planning of the civic area, and if we don't have $70,000 in there, we've not got anything else in the budget right at this time to
There is a little
plan
bit of other carry forward there, but that would be useful, and if you don't do that, you would need to, our suggestion is you need to put some funding aside, and that was OPEX, which is most appropriate given that you don't know what you're going to use of that master planning process. So it would be more appropriate to have that as operational expenditure than capital.
So I just want to suggest that if we are keeping that in there, that we change the description on it.
But for now, it's parked, which is the right thing, but what I talked about was not quite right, so I just wanted to clarify the earlier advice. Yeah.
Supplementary on that, do we know that 70k is the figure we need for the master planning, or are we just taking that because it's there? If we took 20 of it for the heritage strategy, do we still need to add more?
With 2 carry forward lines that we were going to use for that sort of master planning and subsequent work, I will go back and check. I mean, it was our best guess, given that you haven't had your first workshop, we don't know what you want and the nature and extent of what you want. So you could allocate some of it, you could have unbudgeted expenditure for the master plan work. It's really hard to know until you've given us direction. Yeah.
Can I also just say, that the value of, I was just going to say the value of master planning, but it's a different issue.
Well, just the original source of that funding was where? Because it's been carried forward just because the fact that it was museum was one component of the original, but in the fact that what came to light was iwi's opposition to the museum being in Willow Street, very strong, that therefore the idea that there may be a museum in Willow Street in the future is fairly unlikely. Therefore, do we need to look at how we use that money?
Perhaps we should have that debate this afternoon or whenever we're going to pick up these items lying on the table. Yeah. We can do some work to help.
If there's any information that will help that debate, that's what I'm...
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Can I bring another question about the $200,000 for consultation around Te Tumu, and whether whether that amount of money... Oh, is it not in this?
It's not an OPEX.
Section?
No, but when we come to the end, if all of the other issues have been addressed and it still hasn't, that was that wash-up that I was talking to Councillor Arbery before, if there are still matters associated with the budget that haven't been covered in any of it, then we can address those as a package. And if you want to flag those with us informally during the day, then we can make sure we've got information on those.
I'll just flag that now then, if we can get some kind of breakdown on what that
what that $200,000 entails? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, we're talking about G1, yeah, which is the events framework funding budget. Councillor Bordock, you got your answer, I presume, in respect of, thank you. Councillor Clout. Thank you. And Councillor Arbery.
Assuming he's moving to keep it the same, I'm happy to second.
So I'm option 1, which is confirming the reduction of the event funding framework by 200,000, which is the same as the draft.
Which is the same as the exactly the draft.
Okay.
Right, thank you, Councillor Clout. Would you like to
just
talk
very
to
briefly, we went through this a month ago. And I would note that the total events funding framework budget still is 875,000. So there's still a healthy acknowledgement there of the importance of events to our social, cultural and economic well-being. And so I think a 200,000 reduction was appropriate to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arbery.
Well said, Calvin.
Comments, councillors? Can I put this to you then? That being the case, all those in favour of G1, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. May I just point out to you that from G1 to, well, now G2 to 12, you will see that the mostly options 1, are that which were the same as the draft AP, except for number 10, X, which is option 2, is the same as the draft AP. So just be aware of that as we're going through. It's just a change, a swap out. It doesn't make any difference, but just in case you're looking at option 1 as always being that in the AP, it swaps out in X or 10. Okay, folks, G2, the New Year's Eve event funding budget. Pages 13 and 15. Option 1, which is same as the draft AP, $494,000 for the New Year's Eve event funding, and options 2, as you read it there, is to cease the New Year's activities and reduce the budget to $50,000. Is there a mover and a seconder for either of those options? Move option 1. Thank you, Councillor Morris. Can I have a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Salisbury. Councillor Morris, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, briefly, the idea of having these different events around the city, I think, has been successful, rather than trying to congregate everybody in the CBD or the Mount, as in the past. The additional budget, well, not the additional budget, the full budget enables us to consider perhaps something at the Mount this New Year's, whereas a reduced budget would reduce that likelihood. And I just point out some personal satisfaction with Councillor Clout and our sausages at Papamoa. We had some 3,500 people at the Gordon Spratt Reserve, which was the largest in the city by far. So they loved our sausages, mate. It was great.
Very good. Nothing like a good sausage sizzle. Can't even say that properly. Councillor Clout. Who was the councillor? I beg your pardon, Deputy Mayor Salisbury.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just provides something really lovely and family-friendly for our community on New Year's Eve. I think it's great.
Tremendous. Anyone else? Councillor Granger, followed by Councillor Baldock.
Look, I'm not supporting this. My reasons for this, the amount of time that I've spent on council, which will be 15 years after this next term, I just feel for that amount, and I've discussed it with many people, for that amount of $494,000 for such a short period, I will not. I would be happy to halve that, but I certainly won't support that amount.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I also won't be supporting this. I'm also of a view that we need to take it down. Fireworks last 5 minutes, and there's so many things that I would put ahead of this, as in that would last a lot longer than 5 minutes. For example, our place.
Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, thanks for that. New Year's was one of those cultural things that the Western world has enjoyed for as long as there has been a December turning to a January, and I think our public enjoy that particular piece of our culture. It's certainly not a 5-minute experience. New Year's starts certainly earlier in the day and finishes well into the morning of the first day of the year, and I think as a cultural experience it's something that we should retain, and if we can help retain it, then great.
Councillor Raby, I apologise, I may have missed you earlier.
No, that's okay. I suppose I'm in a similar boat as Bill and Heidi in that this is a one-night event, whereas I'd be happy to take a reduced amount. I think it's an important event for the city, but there are other things on our list, like our place that's here for the whole year that people can visit, any day of the year. That's a lot more value to the city than that one night, although I do think we should have some family events, so just a reduced budget is what I'd be looking to move.
Thank you.
Second afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Kitty, followed by Councillor Clout, followed by Councillor Robson.
I must say this is one of the hardest decisions to make for the fact that I am in for prudent spending, especially what I think is coming up in the future. However, I am also aware that, and I will talk for the Mount specifically on this, that they have been upset in the past that there has been nothing there, and they do want to see something in the way of New Year's events, and my concern is if we drop it for the Mount Maunganui community, that we will be left out in the cold again, and that is a massive concern for them at this particular point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Clout, followed by Councillor Robson.
Yeah, thanks very much. Despite my culinary expertise on New Year's Eve, I do feel that the total budget is excessive, and so I would be happy to approve half of it, but let's just see how this votes. But I'd be happy to, 200,000, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. It is difficult. I mean, the cultural thing is quite fascinating, and what's even more fascinating is people with familiarity with the calendar going from year to year have no familiarity with the calendar going from millennia to millennia and wanted to celebrate the new millennium a year early. But be that as it may, I too am somewhat perturbed by $500,000 going out in OPEX when I look at the other demands we have in the city. I'm also conscious that for those people who want a family experience, that Matariki would be a far better time to let off fireworks, because then a lot of our younger people for whom fireworks are awesome could actually experience it, whereas in the middle of summer, fireworks don't do much, a bit like lights in Wharf Street until after no one needs them. So I'm not comfortable with signing off. Sorry, did that slip out? I'm not comfortable signing off $500,000 here, but I don't have in front of me sufficient information to get a lower option. So I would like to move an amendment that this matter lays on the table and that staff are requested to bring back options around lower cost. There was some discussion around lower cost options, but what we've been presented with here today is an all or nothing thing. But there was some earlier conversations around a lower cost option. So I would like this to lay on the table and staff bring us back options between everything, $500,000 or basically nothing.
Okay, thank you. Hear that loud and clear. Councillor Graham, just before I go to you, I will just remind us all that Inspector Paxton did talk, and I'm not speaking in support of this or opposed to it in what I'm saying, I'm just recounting the facts as he described them to us, and Gareth, you may add some colour to this. He did say that if we don't do something, and in those particular areas around family-oriented events, we can, and he may have used the words, expect trouble or civil disturbance of some sort that would be problematic potentially, and he encouraged us to do this. Now, I'm not speaking to the motion necessarily, but I just wanted to remind us what the police were saying. Gareth, have you got a view on this?
I think through the chair, page 14 outlines Inspector Paxton's opinion on the matter.
Thank you. Councillor Granger.
Second that amendment.
Procedural motion, I think, or am I revealing my inexperience with standing orders? But I believe to lie on the table is the procedural, and it just has to be voted on.
Understand? Yep. Understand what you said. We're happy to accept the procedural motion if I can put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? One, so this is Councillors Hollis. Yeah, to accept for it to lay on the table. Sorry, as I understand it, the motion is to leave this lay on the table while staff come back and give us other options that may be, for example, a cost reduction while still able to do something without doing nothing. That's what I've heard. So I'm now putting that to you, that this would lay on the table. Are we all comfortable with that? All those in favour? Against? And that motion is carried. Thank you very much. And Gareth, it might just play to, I'm happy to liaise with the police with you if you don't, just to say, what is it that they would like us to see us do and what might work and where could we...
Yeah, through the chair, this will be a relatively simple piece of work. There's a couple of options. One is just to do fireworks, which I think probably doesn't work for the intention that the elected members have for that evening. The second will be a simple selection of where you want to undertake community events on New Year's Eve, because with a limited amount of money, rather than 5 locations, you will have to choose 2 or 3 or 4.
Could I?
Yeah, or no fireworks and just more sausage sizzles. I think the fireworks is the majority of the expense, I would imagine. So I think we're looking for creative options and what you come back with.
Yep, we'll do a with and without fireworks option.
Councillor Bulldog.
Well, I think there's also the option of reduced fireworks, is there not? I mean, if they went a little bit shorter, there's a lot of money saved, and how much goes up in smoke, isn't it?
There's a little bit of money saved. There's some money associated with the setup and everything that comes from launching fireworks in 6 or 7 different sites, and then you definitely save money based on the length of fireworks. You also save money based on the height of fireworks. So we specifically request the height of the fireworks so that a large part of the city can see them from home. And if you reduce cost by reducing the height, people then can't see them from home. So there are kind of wider implications than just shorter time and smaller fireworks.
All about bang for your buck. Do we need to go, if you'll excuse the phrase, do we need to hammer this to death or can we move on from...
We will bring some
the
options.
Staff are going to get more information and come back. Very good. Thank you, folks. Which takes us now on to G3. Is that correct? Yes. G3, the council organised events budget. You'll see the 2 options there. Option 1 is the same as the draft AP. Option 2 is to add back $100,000. Yeah, and on page 15, yes. Thank you, Councillor Clout. May I have a seconder for option 1, which is the same as the draft AP? Councillor Granger. Thank you.
Yeah,
Councillor
thank
Clout.
you. In the spirit of trying to sort of push the minus button a few times, I think this is actually right on the button, as it were. That was unintended. And I'd note that there is still $105,000 still remaining for events such as the Anzac commemorations. And sure, look, when it comes to some specific event celebrations, there's no reason why staff couldn't come back to us or even elected members initiate a motion to actually put some extra money in. As and when required, but at this stage, happy to take the $100,000 out. And I note that it was supported overwhelmingly by our submitters.
Thank you very much. Councillor Granger.
It's been said, I think the major point here, that on some instances, another $100,000 we can put into something with a greater priority than that.
You, Councillor Hollis, followed by Councillor Bulldog.
I've got some concern with the events that are conglomerated together in this. The Women's Cricket World Cup is quite a big national, global event for all the cricketing nations anyway. And the Anzac Day services, reducing those, I have some concern. I'd like to know what the quantum of those 2 reductions would be.
Through the chair, there's no plan to reduce Anzac Day services at all. That's approximately half of the remaining event delivery budget. the other half of the remaining budget would be used for a variety of different things as they come up, some of which would be leverage support of the Cricket World Cup. Yeah.
Just so that I know, if the Women's Cricket World Cup does come, will there be some money available to show some form of support to that?
Yes. Less than would be ideal, but yes.
That answers it, thanks.
Can I ask a supplementary to that as well? The 105,000 on Anzac Day, where is that spent?
No, the remaining event delivery budget is 105,000, of which approximately 50 or 45 to 50 is spent on Anzac Day.
I see. I misunderstood. Thank you very much, Gareth. Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I think events are very important to the recovery, but of course we are not going to have in the foreseeable future international guests that we can think of. I do need to point out that this doesn't save us any money. We consulted on reducing it 100, and the majority of submitters, by some margin, there's a lot of these submissions that were pretty close, either way, but 279 to 109 agreed with us, but this doesn't save any money. You pushed the wrong button, Councillor Clout.
Oh, is it a neutral button?
It's just a neutral button,
Okay.
this one. So, but I support it.
Thank you. Well, councillors, I'll put this to you. This is G3. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, abstentions and carried. G4, which is the historic village. Option number 1 is the same as the draft AP. Option number 2 is to add 40,000 back to the functions and events budget at the historic village. This is on page 16.
I'll move option 2. Is that option 2?
Thank you, Councillor Baldock.
Add back the 40. Just because I like getting kicked around.
Can I,
Councillor Hughes.
do we know exactly what this was for? It isn't.
The 40,000
Yeah,
specifically?
specifically.
Basically, it's half a staff. It's delaying recruitment of a staff member to support the delivery of events at the historic village. The thinking was that COVID was holding up business, so therefore, because the position was vacant, we would wait a while to recruit. The reality of that is probably not quite. It's actually way busier than we expected it to be, but we can cope.
Baldock has moved option 2. Is there a seconder for that?
I'm happy to move just for discussion. Second.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock.
Well, there was a good briefing or workshop briefing, really, on historic village. I believe it's something that'll cost us a lot of money if we don't keep it moving in its popularity and its growth. And as has been said, the more people going there than what we expected. I think it's something we need to keep working with Blair on. There's lots of other things that are being discussed going forward, but I think it's a small amount of money that could be there to keep that project going. It used to cost us a lot more. We still have a long way to go to get it to be washing its face, but more and more people in the city are appreciating historic village and going there. So I move the motion to see what the lie of the land is.
Thank you, Councillor Arbery.
Well, I'll actually be voting against this one. If Gareth thinks he can manage, then there's no need to add it to the budget. We can add it elsewhere. And I'm sure Gareth will come back to us if he can't cope.
So you're withdrawing your seconding of... Did you not second it?
He did, but he can still vote against it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I just didn't want to leave Larry out there hanging.
Councillor Baldock. Councillor... Death by 1,000 votes. Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Robson.
Thank you. Look, I'm going to support this one, and the reason for it, and Councillor Baldock did touch on it. over the last 3 or 4 years, I've noticed one heck of a change with the village, for the better. And now people, in the past, just like myself, have always wanted to certainly upgrade the historic village, and I just feel that has been done. The hub that's been added down there as well. I just think there's now so much opportunities for the people in our community to enjoy it. So for $40,000, and I just do hope the other councillors will support it as well, I just think it's going to be beneficial for them down there. There are more events involved. So, look, I think it would be, my words, silly not to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I'll be voting against the proposal for option 2. And the main reason is I think that I'm happy to take staff advice on this area. I think the work done by staff and by Blair in particular has made a big difference down there, but so has work by other organisations, and in my mind at the moment I'm inclined to prefer to see this money allocated to an application further down the agenda around Faulkner House and ceramics in a kiln. There are 3 proposals that we're discussing later on in the agenda, and I think that would give us a better return for the city than upping the staff perhaps ahead of where we need to be. I'm also conscious, and I'll mention at the moment while we're on the topic of staff, that the headline in the Herald today said that Auckland Council in their discussions, I think it is today and tomorrow, certainly tomorrow, are talking about laying off 500 staff. Something that we haven't really traversed at all. But in this regard, if staff are telling us they can do the job we're asking them to do, and we can use that money to support initiatives that aren't necessarily council funded, or leverage that money to support people doing other stuff, I think it's a better use for it. So I'd vote against it.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I'm voting against it also, mainly for the same reasons that if we can have things that are ongoing in that community, like Faulkner House, then it provides a stable return on a daily basis for the people that are running businesses down there, and keeps the energy up rather than peaking at various times during the year. So I would support this in this year. In other years, though, if it wasn't for COVID and we had some money, then I would be really in support. All of these kind of things are just looking at trade-offs in our very crazy year that we're looking at here. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? For me, the historic village falls into the Manawa Falls camp in many respects. Very different, I know, but it is part of who we are. It's part of our culture. It recognises a small part of our heritage, but it's a great tourist attraction. But I do agree that I think we can, it's about tightening belts post-COVID, and if the staff can be innovative, just this year particularly, on how they go about their business, I think that's the thing to do right now. And they are wonderful staff down there, and they've created a very vibrant amenity for the city. But I will be voting against this as well. So can I put it to you folks? We're voting on option 2, that we had the money back, which is not the same as the draft AP, just to be clear. But we're voting on option 2. All those in favour of option 2, please say aye. 2, and against? Any abstentions? So 2 versus 9. Thank you. We're on to number 4, serial 4.
Do we now?
I beg your pardon.
We now move.
Oh, we need to move option 1. You're quite right. Thank you.
I'll second that.
So you've moved, Councillor Robson, seconded by Councillor Clout. Do we need discussion, or can we just, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much for that correction. Leads us to number 4, I beg your pardon, 5. The Emergency Management Community Education Budget, which you'll find on pages 16 and 17. Option 1 is the same as the draft AP.
I'll try and win one. I'll move option 1.
Can I ask a question? Is the staff recommendation still the same?
Yep. Through these, we've made the decision not to give recommendations, so it's really a political call based on the submissions that you've received. We provided our recommendations as part of the draft annual plan.
Thank you. Thank you. Seconded. So who, Councillor Border, would you like to speak to this now? Thank you, Councillor Clout. Anybody else? Can I put this to you then? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Number 5, the harbour encroachment budget. So option 1 is the same as the draft AP, pages 17 and 18. Councillor Salisbury, you happy to move? Thank you very much. May I have a second to Councillor Arbery? Thank you very much. Did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, just briefly. I think this is just a deferral of the program. I think the program is great and worthwhile, but I think we're just deferring it for a year, so I think that's wise.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arbery.
Happy not to speak.
I'm going to vote against this. And it is a challenge, but to use a phrase, it grinds my gears that we have people who believe they have some sense of entitlement and annex public land to the point of blocking public walkways. You know, it's interesting in terms of we talk about sometimes sending messages around regulatory functions. And at the moment, Council is prosecuting a court case. I think it's still in courtroom 7. So many 100 metres away from here. It's significant expense to make a point. What that point turns out to be, we'll find out at some point, and we'll find out what the cost is. But we have a situation here where people are basically annexing public land. They're depriving people of the ability to use the public land that the ratepayers of the city have paid for. And I don't think it's worthwhile backing off from keeping the pressure on and signalling that that's just not acceptable. We've done a lot of work at the beach, but it's all over the place. People blocking public walkways. People actually putting up private property signs, right? Do not enter on public space. I think this is a small sum, really, but it's a really, really significant issue, an issue of principle, an issue that affects so many of our public in so many places. I just don't want to back off this, not for this small amount. I want to keep it going, so I'll be voting against the motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I actually agree with Councillor Robson here. I've travelled a lot overseas, and especially in Europe where you can't actually go to the beach, they're all privatised. You try and walk down a beach and you end up with a wall about every 100 metres. And I really, really respect the fact that we have a different scenario here in New Zealand. I'd like to see the access along our foreshore maintained, and I think that this is a small amount of money to continue that work that's going on so that people can have access to the foreshore.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mayor. Question which then may lead to me speaking to the motion. This is OPEX, isn't it? It's not CAPEX.
Correct.
Great, thank you. Yeah, look, I wholeheartedly endorse Councillor Robson's comments and Councillor Hughes' comments and everybody's comments around annexing public land, which is there for everybody to enjoy. However, this is a post-COVID budget, and that goes straight on the rates. So that's a no from me, just for this year. I think that we need to be mindful of that.
Thank you. Putting the motion to you then, option 1, as I understand it, all those in favour, please say aye. Can I just see a show of hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and me. And against? 2. Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. Moving to number 7, the Tropical House display in Robbins Park. Option 1 is the same as the draft AP. Councillor Granger. You'd like to move option 1, Councillor? Seconded by Councillor Hollis. Councillor Granger, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, certainly. Look, as many think the tropical display house should be demolished, and I'll tell you why I disagree. I'm born and bred in Tauranga. I've certainly seen things happen and develop in Tauranga, but this little place, to be honest with you, it is well liked by many. And when I say by many, look, elderly are growing fast in Tauranga. Look at me, one of those. But just remember that we get visitors, and a lot of visitors we do, and I've mentioned to many, pop in and see the tropical, the tropical display house. It's really well worth visiting, and they've come back and said, yes, it is. So let's not destroy something that I feel is, it's only small as it is, but it's a little gem in our city. And for those that do enjoy it, and those in the future that will enjoy it, let's continue with it.
Tremendous, thank you. Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, I think Councillor Grange is right. The site recorded 25,000 visitors in 9 months. That makes it a reasonably well-visited place, and obviously attracts some attention. It'd be nice to know how many individual visits that was, so that 25,000 could get split down into an actual number. But it's certainly something that gets seen a lot. It could do with some work on the outside, but it's definitely enjoyed, and I would definitely support keeping it.
Thank you very much. Any more discussion, or can I put that to you, Councillor Hughes?
I'm so torn on this one because I went in there the other day and I hadn't been to it before, and it's really beautiful, calming kind of place to visit, and it's a little oasis. From the outside, it's a shocker, but when you go in there, it's surprisingly gorgeous. And once it goes for good. So in these times when there's a lot of stress around and people are looking for calm spaces to be, I know this is just a little space, but in the light of it being gone for good, I'd like to think that we gave it another year, and then maybe we looked at what we could do in that whole area to really do something good. So I'll be voting to keep it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes. Councillor...
Move an amendment, if I can, unless you were going to do something like this. Amendment, or Mo, just to add to the resolution that we confirm it, but we review the options in the LTP on either improving it, relocating it, or demolishing it.
I'll second that.
We have an amendment, which is about improving...
Your Worship, if we don't fund it for a year and all the plants inside it die, right?
Well, it's deciding not to fund it.
I'm just asking the question. What would happen? Because there are people who are split on this. It becomes a moot decision, does it not? You can't...
Well, can we just clarify that question?
You can't
if it's not
postpone the
funded,
spend
is it still
for a
looked
year.
after for a year or not?
We currently have a contract on it, which I don't think we can get out of, Gareth, correct?
No, yes, we investigated that. Yes, we can. But yeah, if you don't fund it for a year, the plants will all die. And if you decide to revisit it, there will be some front-end costs to get it back to a state that you would want to go in again. I've got those numbers. I've just got to dig them out.
So the amendment, as I understood it, was, Councillor Baldock, is... You had a second with Councillor Clout. Just with your words.
If I speak to it, look, it's a no-brainer to keep it for this year, because if we don't, we're going to spend 80,000 getting rid of it. And this is a COVID budget, so we would actually be spending more money. I think the long-term issue has been raised during the submissions. It needs to be either upgraded as something worthwhile visiting. Someone made a comment that they could see all of the plants in it, bar one or two in their own backyard, which makes it not really a botanical house, but it could be relocated out to Frank Sydenham, perhaps. So we need to not make this a permanent decision, but for right now, in terms of what we could save for a COVID budget, it's obviously keeping it is cheaper than getting rid of it. And I think we just look at it again next year when we're a bit better space as to whether it remains an iconic thing in the Tauranga City landscape or does go. The submissions were not overwhelmingly either way, 56%. So So that's all I'd say, is just adding the amendment.
Thank you. I've got a number of people wanting to speak on this, but Councillor Clout, did you want to speak first?
Yeah,
as the seconder?
I think the long-term plan is the appropriate place to deal with it. Certainly, I'm leaning towards, getting rid of it, but I'll give it another year, see how it goes, and then look at the options when we look at the LTP. And I think, the amendment is good because it talks about either keeping it or upgrading it or removing it or relocating it. So I think we need to get a decent staff report on all of those options. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure about the order, but if we can go from, as you're looking at it, right to left, your right to left, so Councillor Hollis, Morris, and then...
I agree with Councillor Baldock, and if I was to pick a side for the LTP, I'd love to see it move to the Sydenham Botanical Gardens and turn that into something particularly special for the city, and maybe even add a couple of more tropical plants to get it past 2.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I think you had... Did you have your hand up? No? Moving down the line, Councillor Robson.
Happy to support the amendment. I think it's one of those things that it does need consideration. It regularly comes up. It became a totem of currency in 1316. Like, how many tropical display houses is that particular issue or that initiative? But I note that 25,000 visitors is 8 times more than the number of people that took sausages from a couple of councillors on New Year's Eve. It's not an insubstantial number of people that are going there. And even if it's, as often is the case with Moau base track figures, it's the same person going a number of times. The benefit is still there for those people. The joy is still there. So happy to support the amendment, happy to support the substantive.
You heading down that way, Deputy Mayor Salisbury, followed by Councillors Granger and Kitty.
I have a question around the cost of the contract of maintaining it. I just wondered if there was a garden club out there that this year would love to take care of it for us. I don't know what the value is of that contract or whether we've explored that before, but it could be a nice way for the community to be involved in keeping it going this year.
Gareth, do we know the value of that contract? It's 2.
Well, I'll just hand over to Mark. He can answer that question and also the volunteer question.
So the contract in our previous iteration of tendering was a bit more expensive. This time it is as per the numbers in your paper in front of you. And during a previous LTP, we were asked to go out to the community and see if there's a group that could maintain it for us. And whilst there was a lot of enthusiasm, nobody actually had the ability to give the time to maintain that. It requires cleaning every day, locking and unlocking, and a whole heap of other maintenance items. Plus you need an off-site greenhouse to prepare the plants for the regular changeovers of the display. So nobody in the community was able to do it.
Thanks very much, Mark. We're back to Councillors Granger, followed by Kitty.
Yeah, thank you. I've got my arm up my back quite high. Thanks, Councillor Baldock, but I will agree with the amendment.
I think it's really important just to realise that we are also looking at spending 61,000 as opposed to 80 to pull it down. It's fairly obvious what we should be doing, especially given COVID and what they're predicting from the health department on mental health issues. This could be a beautiful place that a lot of our community can enjoy, and those who haven't been there, could really be a bit of advertising, a bit of encouragement from us to go there would be a really important thing. It doesn't make any sense to pull something down when it's going to cost us more than what it is to keep it alive and running.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arbery.
That last comment bodes well for the Outplace discussion.
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, I'm happy to support the amendment. I mean, the thing with these decisions is they add up over time, so it's not just this year's cost. You have to think about how long this is going to cost over the long term, but the call to put it into the LTP is the right one.
Very good. Thank you very much. So I'm putting the amendment to you. Robin, do we have... which is review the discussion in the LTP process, including the options to upgrade, relocate or demolish the tropical display house. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, abstentions and carried. Thank you very much. And then the substantive. Option, I'm just trying to find my page here. Robbins Park, here we go, which is option 1. Can I just put that to you? All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. I'm just looking at the clock again, just to let you know, we will break for lunch at 12:30, so we've got 27 gruelling minutes to get through before lunch, starting with the hanging baskets. Councillor Cloud.
I'd like to move option 2 to remove the hanging baskets.
Very good. And Councillor Kitty, I think you were beaten to the punch by Councillor Arbery to second that. Were you going to second that, Yako? Yes, well, you were beaten to the punch. Sorry. So, Councillor Clout, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, look, thanks very much. I cannot, for the life of me, see how some hanging baskets in the CBD draws people in, encourages people to shop locally. Okay, yes, they do look pretty, but I think they should actually be the responsibility of the individual shop owners or indeed downtown Tauranga. And I note that there was quite an overwhelming number of submitters who agreed with my particular stance on that. 261 versus 156. So happy, that's 62%. Thank you, Councillor Baldock. So I'm happy to move this and encourage my colleagues to do the same. And this will, in fact, be an actual push of the minus button. Thank you.
Yes, I think that is correct. Thank you very much. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, this probably won't be the first time today I'll make an appeal to popularity, but like Kelvin, I note that 261 submitters disagreed, while only 156 agreed. When I compare this again to our place, I think this has a lot less value compared to some of those other things that attract people into the CBD.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
I absolutely agree. I think that I'd just like to put in a plug for hanging baskets versus our place with a 6,000 person petition, but also that I'd like to just make an amendment that we keep the brackets in place, which gives the opportunity for people to put their own for businesses to put their own hanging baskets up. Is that not possible? Hang on, Nick's shaking his head.
Structurally, that could mean some issues. Some of them are at the end of their life, and we do assess them. So it wouldn't be as simple as that. I think at the moment we would either own them or not have them at all, unless we had a specific structural assessment of each of the installations, which would be quite costly in itself. So I would suggest that we don't give shop owners the option of doing their own thing with our assets. They do add maybe up to, they've got a number here, between 30 and 50% to the wind loading, and as they are at the end of their, some of them are at the end of their life. I don't know if you're walking your dog in the CBD, Councillor Granger, but it might have something to do with it.
No, very good, Nick. Thank you very much.
Prepared to take your advice. Thank you.
Thank you. So putting this to you then, the hanging baskets, I beg your pardon, Councillor Granger.
Listening to Councillor Clout before, it certainly may not draw people into the city, but just remember too that these things called the hanging baskets, they add something to the city, and what better than colour. There's only one thing though, I'm still going to support this for them to be removed, and the only reason for that is simply this, is $89,000 in my mind. I just cannot see that amount for those baskets.
Very good, thank you. It's 79 actually, because it's a $10,000 demob fee. Folks, can I put this to you? This is option B. This is not the same as the AP, but if I could put option B to you, option 2 to you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much, which takes us now on to number 9, the Waterline Education Project, which you'll find on page 20, of which option 1 is the same as the draft AP. Thank you. We've got Councillor Robson as the mover. Who was the seconder? Sorry, Councillor Baldock. Thank you. Do you wish to speak to this now?
I think it's a prudent move. It's in line with suggested recommendations. I think there are other avenues for doing this, having just been receipt of an extraordinarily large water bill. I would have liked, associated with that, an advance email and a chance to remortgage my house. Yeah, let's cut the program and let's sharpen up what we're currently doing.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Bulldog.
Yeah, this is a neutral budget button we can push. 62% agreed with us. I think it's reasonable saving.
Yeah, just a question, sorry. Do we know if this will actually save that 45,000, or will we pick up that cost in extra blockages in the pipes? What's your sense?
So when we did look at this, the assessment was that this wouldn't be a detriment to the program. So we're not taking a step backwards, but we are maintaining the sort of status quo and maybe moving forward a little bit. So we are slowing the program down. We're lowering costs on collateral, etc. But it's not that we're switching it off altogether. So I don't think we would see an increase in. Yeah, the intent is for us not to take a step backward, and that's how we settled on the number.
Thanks very much, Doug.
Yep, happy to support in that case.
Pardon, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. Which moves us now on to number 10, and I'll just draw your attention, and as we mentioned before, that option 2, not 1, is the same as the draft AP. And this, of course, is on page 20 and 22. You're happy to move option 2. Thank you, Councillor Hollis. Can I get a seconder for option 2? Councillor Morris, thank you. Would you like to speak to that now while the others are thinking? And they're
We've already spent a substantial amount on this, and I think that it won't harm us to wait a year or so to throw some more into it. I'm certainly happy to delay it for a little while.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Morris.
Yeah, briefly, I think the submission of Terry and Robin Malloy was quite impactful, because I know Terry is the chief supporter, and Robin, of this project, and his acknowledgement of COVID, and understanding that it is a long-term project and it best sits within the long-term plan. Yeah, I just acknowledge that, so I support option 2.
Thank you. Councillor Bulldog.
Yeah, I have a lot of regard for Councillor Malloy and his wife in this regard, but I was surprised by their submission because it's not a matter of delaying it for a year. It is about providing information for the LTP, and the LTP is where we will make a decision about this project. And I'm concerned that if this is not about building anything or doing anything, it's about the continued options and discussion, which is information we will need for the LTP. If we can see that still done without 200,000, but I don't know how we can ever do that. It's an issue that is going to continue to be like it is in the submission. 53% agreed with not adding it, 47, and they do so on various reasons. We didn't say a lot about what that 200,000 was going to do, that it was simply to inform the decision. A lot of people think this has to happen, even the Malloys when they came. Basically, this is something they believe the city will do one day. It'll never be cheaper than, the sooner we do it. So I won't support this. I think we should still spend this for the information to feed into the LTP, in my opinion.
Thank you. Councillors Hughes, followed by Clout.
I'm a massive supporter of this project, and I believe that it should at some stage go ahead, and I believe that I really like to see it stay in the long-term plan, but on the basis of what we're dealing with here this year, $200,000 at this point, I won't be I won't be supporting that we keep that $200,000 in, but I will be supporting that we keep this in the LTP and that this project stays live.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Clout, followed by Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a little bit of confusion here because we are still holding on to $200,000 within this current year's budget, and in paragraph 86 you'll see there that the focus on the feasibility and community engagement as foreseen is considered to be deliverable within a $200,000 budget and existing staff resources. So we're not slowing this project down, we're just reducing the total from 400,000 to 200,000. So I'm pleased to see that that is still going ahead, and I just would like confirmation that that is the case.
Yeah, can we just get confirmation on that assertion, please?
I'm just going to look at Doug, but my understanding is that's not correct, and that if the 200,000 comes out, no work will happen on this project until we get money again. Is that correct, Doug? Cool. That is correct.
So that's different to what is written on paragraph 86, because paragraph 86, in my mind, says that the work is still going to go ahead because it can be done within the $200,000 budget, because it was originally 400,000, and also within existing staff resources.
So, yeah, my recollection of the conversation over the last little while was that Councillor Robson, some way back, added 400,000, suggested we add $400,000 in the budget for the current financial year to complete this work. It got reduced at a subsequent meeting to 200,000, and then it got taken out. So there is no money available to continue this project, regardless of what paragraph 86
as I
says.
recall, and Councillor Robson will remember this better than I, it was an amendment that wasn't carried, as I recall. Is that correct?
Distinctly recall saying do it once and do it properly, and moving an amendment to move it to 400. My mind has buried the results in a deep dark hole, and I'm unable to recover it at the moment. And I'd take advice from those who're more familiar with the minutes of the meeting.
Thanks, Marty.
I think what you'll find is that as part of the annual plan work, we proposed that we could do the feasibility for 200,000. We put that to council, and the 200,000 was removed, which essentially means that no work would go on between now and the LTP to inform any discussion around the LTP process.
Thank you, Marty. Doug, did you want to add to this?
I'll just confirm that it's correct. The work hasn't commenced waiting for it in sequence with appropriate strategic framework. And so the 400,000 was an unbudgeted amount, which was asked to be found by the CE to support the work. The 200,000 proposed here was to continue the work within what we thought we needed to do the work. So if the 200,000 isn't there, then the work will not happen prior to the LTP or this financial year.
Thank you. So in speaking to that, then I will be voting against it, because I think this project does still need to continue and to be progressed. So I'll vote against the option 2.
All right, thank you. I think the Chief Executive wanted to add something else.
Well, only to, I think, stress the importance of developing and advancing feasibility and design work, despite the fact that a funding stream might not be readily available or in view at the time. And I think what we saw this morning with the announcement of a $40 million grant from the Crown to Gisborne to develop their Olympic pool is a prime example, I think, of forward planning, design, having a community on board with you, despite the fact that funding might not be available. And I just think that's something that as a council we need to do the preparatory work, despite the fact that a funding stream for delivery might not necessarily be obvious at that point in time. So just some comments.
Thanks, Marty. Councillor Arbery, followed by Councillor Granger, and followed by Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I think there's really a lot of value in having options and having something that you can pull the trigger on when the conditions are right. So if you do your structured planning, for example, you don't need to pull the trigger on all your capital investment on your infrastructure until market conditions are right. Similarly with these sorts of investigations, I think just having the option and and knowing the risks and knowing how feasible the project is to make good decisions that the LTP has value. If this doesn't go through, I know one submitter made a suggestion around adding temporary access down to the waterfront there, so I'd be keen to explore that later on in the day once we come to the submissions.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'm certainly supporting option 2. And it's simply this, this project to me, and the discussion we've had in the past, in the long run, the cost would be extreme. And the Tauranga City Council is just not in that position to go that far. So supporting this decision, not to provide the $200,000 to continue, me, is common sense.
I just, the last time it came, I think one of the things that put the jitters under everyone is that a price tag of around $17 million came out, and it was about 6 metres wide, and it was all the bells and whistles. If this $200,000 investigation goes through, will that give us some options around costing for a lower and medium? Do we get to that point with that, or are we just going, or do we get to the point where the community just goes, yes, we want it, or no, we don't? What's the end point before the LTP that allows us to have a better decision making around this?
Yes, all of that, I think, Councillor, it will give us a range of options and or opportunities that perhaps we may have thought about or we haven't thought about. It will help inform decisions. So at the moment, really, we don't have an option to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robson. Fear that if we take the Chief Executive's observation to heart, we could wind up exploring a whole range of possible additions to our fair city on the grounds that we need to be prepared for the possibility of a funding stream. And then it becomes a decision for us, which of those gambles are we prepared to take? When I think about all the things that if I had an unlimited sum of money I would like to investigate in preparedness for a lottery win, I could spend an enormous amount undertaking those investigations. I think this project for me needs to be part of an LTP discussion. We have had a number of attempts to take this to the community. The last one really I was seriously concerned about. And we went out with a number that we knew didn't reflect the cost of the project. We knew when we went out that the number we put in the consultation collateral did not reflect what we professionally on the staff side and, you know, amateurishly on the political governance side knew didn't reflect the cost. So we really need to get this right. We really need to frame this up. And I think we really owe it to our community not to do an investigation unless we're prepared to commit a funding stream to it. Because to do otherwise is to hold out false hope to people who, some of them are so passionate about this project and so frustrated. And you talk about Terry and his wife. I mean, you know, they understand, they've been around this loop before. We shouldn't do it to them. So my view is the whole thing should be parked in the LTP. And on that basis, I'll support it. Option 2. Thank you. Well, I will put that.
If you wouldn't mind, I'll have a...
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Yeah. So I just want to respond to a lot of things will never be cheaper. And if that's the case, I think we should get a hurry on with 4-laning Haireni Bridge. And also, I'd like to see, a plan for the gondola going up Mauo, which I think would be another, never going to be cheaper. Look, there was somebody that presented a plan that included replenishing sand. We've pretty well mucked around with the harbour and increased the water flow through that area, which has dragged the sand out to be dredged and thrown back on Main Beach. It's affecting Pilot Bay as well, and I would like to talk about that at some point, replenishing some of the inner harbour beaches that we've stuffed up with our works. But the big thing for me is that this adds something between 0.1, 0.2%, and because we're trading off, that's a bigger consequence to me than worrying about another couple of 100,000 to investigate something that we've already dropped $500,000 on. I'm not sure of the number, I think it's 500 and something thousand, but I think we can take a pause and throw it into LTP.
Thank you. Anyone else? Right, very good. Thank you very much. That was the right reply indeed. So I'll put that to you, Council. All those in favour, please say aye. Can I just see show of hands? Can you go that one? And can I just see those show of hands just again? At the moment we've got 5 councillors. And against? And me. The motion is lost. Which takes us back to option 1, and you have moved option 1. Do I have a seconder for option 1? Councillor Clout. I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour of option 1, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? You can just see hands, so there's no sorry, I got the ayes. Just against, please. Those against? 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. And the motion is carried. You've got the names. Thank you. Which brings us on to our place, and it's now 12:25. Let's give this a go, shall we? Oh, I beg your pardon. I ticked that in. Yep. Let's do that one, and then see how we go. We are on to number 11, pages 22 to 25, economic development. You will note option 1 is the same as the draft AP. Thanks for that correction. Councillor Baldock.
Just a question first. I won't just got to get to my page, but I note in the. It's clear that this is going to be from the commercial rates, not residential, from the report. Yet that wasn't made clear in the discussion document. So many people who, and I just wanted to bring up the fors and against on this. Just give me a moment, please. Where it was, page 24, was it? You know, it was 54% agreed with the additional funding, and the other percentage, 46. But again, they did that on the basis of not knowing that it was commercially funded. So there's no way with the submissions to determine whether the people who were against were residential or commercial. Is that correct? Is there any way of determining from the responses in the submissions whether they were residential or commercial ratepayers? Because I think the commercial ratepayers would see some of the value in it, may have supported it.
No, because you still might be someone who has a commercial business who uses their personal address and email. Yeah, so no.
Clarify that. I'm happy to move if there's no more questions.
Thank you. Can I get a seconder, please?
That will be to include 130.
Sorry, just to be, to include, so same as a draft plan, so option 1. Seconded by Councillor Clout. Thank you very much. Councillor Bullock, did you want to carry on at this stage?
I'm almost carrying on, aren't I? Sorry, but
I should rephrase that.
Look, I think we had some input from an economist, and you know we do need to invest in economic recovery. This was part of something offered to us by Priority 1. I know it's not a view shared by everyone, but I do believe they deliver good value, and they are not entirely funded by council, but you know have their own memberships and so on. And without them, I think we wouldn't see the stunning statistics within this area of economic growth. Businesses flocking here. The paper today talking about the Taurika business estate land being sold like hotcakes and so on, which is all good. So it is funded by commercial ratepayers. It's not funded by residential ratepayers. and I think there is an indication that they've supported it being done. Of course, the whole number of submissions is not overwhelming, but I think it's enough to take some note of, and I think we should support it. Again, this is one of the issues where if we knew what we were doing with the UAGC, we might have known, how much we're adding to their costs, but I think it's still an amount worth putting in right now.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clout.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I think obviously in this post-COVID environment, it's vital that we do support our business community, particularly the SMEs. And I note that some of the contributions here will be, we're seeking some contribution also from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, both in terms of the Māori specific engagement and also looking into the ferry service. And I also note that we're taking $75,000 out of the international strategy to help reduce this total. So the total 130,000 I think is money well spent for our broader economic success.
Thank you very much. Anyone else, councillors? Councillor Rabry.
Yes, I'll be speaking against this motion. I think if I look through what they've provided to us, they've agreed to pull out 75,000 for their international strategy, and then they've prioritised 7 other areas, and at the moment we're moving to go ahead with all of that, whereas I think we should prioritise the COVID environment, and some of these things like the marine precinct, I just struggle to see how that has a lot of value. So I'll be moving against this, and if this doesn't go ahead, then I'll be moving that we keep their funding unchanged, so that we only approve 75,000 that they can prioritise as they want to.
Anyone else, councillors? Councillor Robson.
Be speaking against this. The least, P1 could have done is come to us without an increase. I think some of the things being argued for here are marginal, and certainly in terms of short-term benefit, given the situation we're in. Upping our OPEX by $130,000 for some of these things just doesn't make any sense to me at all. I'm also conscious that we seem to see economic development and P1 as synonymous. There is a significant part of our community who believe that the whole P1, ED, Tourism Bay of Plenty, Main Street structure should be reviewed. And I'm certainly in that camp. I can't support an additional 130 in this space. The city's economic development is very interesting when you burrow down and you look at where we are. The subsidies we've given the commercial community are significant, but haven't produced a city with significant GDP per head advantages over other cities. I just can't see the return for this investment. I think there are better places to spend it. Personally, I think we should be looking more at the sustainability space, and I would like to see if we're inclined to spend an additional $130,000 anywhere, then I would rather see it in the sustainability space so that our economic development is in fact sustainable. If you look at Tauranga and its growth over the last 20 years, you look at the chaos on our roads, you look at the lack of housing, you look at the continued greenfield expansion, you have to say that this city currently, on its current settings, is not sustainable. And quite frankly, I've never seen P1 raise any question about the sustainability of the direction we're headed in. To me, they are last year's, indeed they are last century's people driving the city to last century's disasters. So I just can't do this in conscience, commercially. On no basis can I support 130 in this space.
Councillor Morris.
With your leave, Your Worship, a question. What is the total funding of Priority 1 from both council and external stakeholders presently?
Yeah, we'll have to just check.
Yeah, it's around $1 million.
Yeah.
Just in the spirit of knowing the answer before asking the question, it's around $1 million.
Ask a question if no one else has got their hand up to speak. Just because we're hearing comments about we could spend this money somewhere else, can I ask Paul probably to comment on the fact that this is money that was going to be commercially paid by commercial ratepayers? So unless you were putting up something else that was funded by commercial, or somehow that, you know, how much of this is going to be tradable? It's not certainly the 130.
That's correct. So it would need to be only able to be spent on other items that were relevant with the economic development rate, as per the revenue and financing policy, and noting that it also obviously has an implication on the UAGC and the differential conversation, because it impacts on that split.
Just to remind the elected members where this came from, so when you receive the presentations, the economic development presentations from economists, you ask Priority 1 to provide a series of options and opportunities for your consideration. So that's where this initiated from.
Councillor Arbery.
Is there an opportunity for some of these things like the Marine Precinct to have a targeted rate on the Marine Precinct users rather than rating generally?
User fee funded activity, there's no rates that go into Marine Precinct. Marine Precinct is actually funded through... Oh, sorry. Yeah, no. Two different things, sorry. Marine Precinct activity is a user fee funded. The support through P1 obviously comes through this rate. So, yeah, I guess it could be.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Speaking to the resolution now, I would have thought that with a revenue of over $1 million, that prioritisation would have occurred within Priority 1. That would have been their Priority 1 during COVID. That is something that should have occurred. And look, you know, good on them for, you know, requesting additional funding. However, I think we need to be conscious around this table that saying that, oh, you know, it's just the commercial rate, it's not going to affect residential ratepayers. I don't think that line works anymore. Not when your sort of mean commercial property is looking at 11% rates increase. We just can't do that anymore. It's not fair on our commercial ratepayers. So that being said, looking at our 4.7% total increase that the Mayor and I share an aspiration to reduce, I think given the previous decision, the $200,000 added and the others, we've got some work to do, and so we need to start working here as well.
Just speaking to the resolution, always nice to know that I'm on the side of Councillor Morris. I find it odd that Priority 1 is lambasted to quite this degree, and I wonder what has brought that about, and included in that was T-Bop, I think, and one other entity, and I wonder how that's happened too, because the works that I've seen them do are really, I think, about considerable value to the city. And I know the work that they are doing on a number of fronts, and ferries was mentioned particularly, is quite extraordinary, and they've stepped up big time on looking at what the options are for a ferry service, and it could add huge value to not just the city economically, but in terms of the concept of multimodal transport options from Omokoroa into the city. I think there's some really good work that is being done. I like the idea that, unlike many, if not all, other economic development agencies around the country, P1 has been formed out of business. I think that is its strength, and I think that being a partner in that is very important. So I will support this. I appreciate that we are in difficult times, but I think economic investment in a city that requires it as desperately as this city does, particularly post-COVID-19, is the right place to be looking. So I will certainly be supporting the resolution. Councillor Baldock.
Just a brief right of reply, and I concur with your comments. I'm not quite sure why we hear these repeated speeches. I think they actually get very close to a breach of standing orders in regard to showing respect to people in the community, particularly a partner that we support. But I won't raise it as a point of order. I I think the issue of doing other things for the commercial sector with targeted rates is a valid point made by Councillor Arbery, but it can't be done in this annual plan. It's not a way we can shift any money around, because that's something we have to consult on at some length, so which would be an LTP discussion. P1 did do a lot of reprioritisation. When they presented to us, they showed what they were looking at in their budgets. But if you go down there, have a look, they've got quite a bit going on down there. There's a lot of staff working there very hard, and I certainly believe they have delivered for the city over the 20 years that they've been in force as an economic development partner. So I hope we do support it. It's going to be close, but I do believe it's money well invested. Remember the comments or the question clarification whereby this doesn't give us 130,000 to spend on something else. It's something that will help business.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baldock. So I'll put that to you. Option 1, all those in favour, please say aye. And could I just see a show of hands, please? 4 versus, what is it, 8? 7? Sorry, and abstentions? Against? Oh, just against? Sorry, against. Can I see those against? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Any abstentions? Obviously not mathematically. So that is lost.
I'm happy to move option 2.
Yep, thank you. Do I have a seconder for option 2? Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Okay. Yep.
Against? Abstentions? It's an abstention? Did you want the counter? Oh, okay. Oh, I presume, given it's the counter of what we've just discussed, the corollary didn't really...
Well, it's more nuanced than black and white.
Oh, I see. I beg your pardon. I figured everybody was hungry, but I take that back. So let's not go to the vote, and let's just keep on talking.
I'll reserve.
Councillor Robson. Hollis, would you like, you're reserving, Councillor Hollis, would you like to speak at this point? Councillor Robson, it's all yours.
Yeah, look, if there was a motion to actually review the figure, the point is $1 million is a significant amount, and we're sort of nodding it through with the no change option. But I don't think we've genuinely explored the topic, and I come back to the issue of value for money and a review. So I would like to move an amendment to this substantive motion. I would like to move that we not include, and that the economic development ecosystem of Tauranga City be reviewed before the long-term plan is completed.
Christine, would you comment on that, please? Thank you.
So if you'd wish to do that, that's fine, but you'd need to put some resources in. So the current staff resources are basically fully allocated over the next 3 to 4 months on a number of other projects, particularly the staff that would do this is around the vision and the resolutions that you've already passed in terms of other pieces of LTP work. So should you wish to do that, then I'd suggest that that be externally resourced, and you'd need to put some funding in place for that to occur. I don't know how much. Yeah, there's just not capacity. So because things to get into the LTP basically needs to be done over the next 4.5 to 5 months, and there isn't capacity to do that.
Councillor Robson.
If I can respond, I mean, it's a not unreasonable point staff are making. However, some guidance from staff as to the amount of resource required to undertake a review would be of some assistance in terms of discussing it. If the amount is $10,000, I'll write you the check now. If the amount is $1 million, I may have to talk to my partner.
Perhaps if I could comment that we are a contributor to an organisation that is funded by business as well as us and other local authorities I think it might be appropriate for us to review our contribution, but I don't know whether it's necessarily our place to review the role and or performance of another organisation per se. So I think there needs to be a wee bit more, I guess, discussion about what it is we are reviewing. If we want to review the ecosystem of economic development across the sub-region or Tauranga, because I guess because P1 is it's a sub-regional entity, of which I just think that may include looking at, and it would include looking at priority one, but it might include looking at a whole lot of other issues as well. It's probably a significant piece of work. Not so our contribution. I think that would limit the scope of any review.
The other point I'd make is that in the AFTI document that you approved on the 1st of July, there's an action in there which is for P1 to lead a review of economic development strategy for the sub-region. So you've already signed that off, which is obviously part of this broader mixed economic development, but it's your call. But I think we need to be clear on scope, and we need to make sure we've got sufficient resources so that we can respond to the resolution.
Staff, obviously, I'm aware of the line that puts P1 in charge of the ED thing in AFTI. One often in democracy swallows some rats when one agrees to a larger substantive motion. That was one of the ones I swallowed. And I didn't get indigestion. I'm fine. Thank you for caring. The issue for me is the substantive issue here is really understanding where we are in terms of economic development. And the big issue for me is the sustainability issue. And I'm trying to get from staff what it would require. I don't think we're reviewing an external organisation when we review this city's ED ecosystem. We play in the ED space. We fund some organisations that I'm very comfortable with this funding and believe they're doing a great job. Tourism Bay of Plenty being an example of that. We fund other organisations that I and others in the community have questions about. I believe it behoves us, when we add up our total spend in this space, it is $3-4 million a year. If we look at Tourism Bay of Plenty, Priority One, the Main Street organisations, and other places where we do economic development work or work in that space, such as Venture Centre. So all I'm asking is that we look at that holistically, systemically, and that staff provide us with some view of that so we can inform our decision making rather than just in silos doing this year what we did last year, particularly when we look at where we are as a city.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I mean, we are dealing with a proposed amendment here. We've had a lot of discussion and questions back and forth. We were trying to finish by 12:30 for lunch. If there is an amendment and if it has a seconder, then perhaps Councillor Robson can continue to make his comments. I would ask that we try and get back on track.
And I agree. Well, it was seconded for discussion. Councillor Morris, where do you stand on the amendment now?
I maintain the seconding for discussion, yeah.
The speech, he certainly went over 5 minutes.
Did you, Councillor Robson, Morris, do you wish to talk to it at all now?
Yes, and look, I note with interest and without making a judgment on it, the contribution to debate by Tauranga City Council staff in this forum. So I would like an answer to the question that Councillor Robson, I think, played with a very straight bat. What would the resource be that is required to fulfil this proposed resolution?
And that, Councillor Morris, Councillor Robson, I think depends on the scope of the proposal and the review. I wouldn't want to pluck a number out of the air without understanding the scope, and I just wonder whether it might be a better approach to perhaps invite, if we have some concerns or some gaps in what we think that the Economic Development Agency is or isn't doing, it might, perhaps the first step might be to invite them back to I guess, understand that and have that conversation with them.
staff, and I appreciate the contribution staff are making here, but for me it's a significant issue. It's millions of dollars a year into a certain space that needs to deliver outcomes that serve the city well, and we need to understand it. Would it be more appropriate to ask for an issues and options paper in this, so not ask for a review, but ask for issues and options about how we might review our economic development situation? I don't see it as reviewing particular organisations. It is the wider question about what's the ecosystem here, what's it actually delivering, where do we sit relative to other cities, what's our performance? Is there something I'm looking for help to explore the issue.
Okay, so putting the issue of funding aside, because that's a decision which you'll make shortly, I think what we can do is we can work with Priority One and or any other organisation to bring a report back to you that might then inform another piece of work in the future. I'm not necessarily locking in or committing any funding in the annual plan for the purpose of doing a review, but firstly understanding and working with those agencies to provide you an options report for the future.
I mean, if that's acceptable to staff and doesn't place too great a burden, because I'm conscious of the staff workload. The only concern I have is working with P1 specifically, as opposed to working with other organisations that operate in this space, particularly the sustainable space.
So just to clarify the burden, what do you mean by that?
Workload. You know, staff.
Well, the staff, it'll be a workload for the staff, but you talk about the burden on P1, I think you said.
No, the burden, I'm concerned about working with P1, but I'm also concerned about, as opposed to all the other agencies in this space, I'm also concerned about the burden.
Well, just
on
to clarify,
staff.
there's only one CCO in the entities that have been mentioned that we can look at in this way, and that's TBOP, which you said are doing a fantastic job, or words to that effect. There is, P1 is only partly funded by us, and I think you mentioned Main Street earlier on, which is not ours either, but we part fund them.
The issue, Your Worship, for clarification, is looking at our ED, our city's economic development ecosystem. That doesn't include just organisations we fund. Maybe we should be funding organisations that are working in that space. We're not currently doing it. But it's getting an independent and strategic overview, so we as governance in the area of strategy and risk can determine whether the $4 million plus we're spending now makes good sense, or whether it's a better place to spend it.
Thank you. So what's going on here is a paper around our entire Western Bay Plenty economic development. No? Okay, I think it really would need to extend to the Western Bay Plenty to be of any use, otherwise we're in a silo. Councillor Arbery.
If John and Steve are open to it, could they perhaps withdraw and we come back to this later on in the day or later tomorrow, once we can have a chat to staff and get a view of what you're after?
I'd be happy to proceed on that basis.
So
whiteboard the issue. And with conversation, figure out where.
If you have a procedural motion to leave it lie on the table, then we'll put it on the white, if that's
I was
passed by
hoping
majority.
they'd withdraw the amendment.
Oh, okay, that's the other way of doing it.
Okay, I'll do a procedural motion and leave it lie on the table if that's needed.
All right, so there is a procedural motion that this lie on the table. Can I have a seconder for that?
Just unclear. I thought he was saying he would withdraw the amendment.
Oh,
okay.
no.
Change his mind.
It's just the amendment line on the table?
Well, the amendment is for the review of, as I understand it, was the effect of the expenditure by Tauranga City Council into economic development agencies of various sorts. I'm using that broadly. It's a report. BD.
Yeah, so I'm just moving that we let it lie on the table,
Yep.
so we can discuss it after we've discussed it informally.
Understand?
Be leaving all of 10 lying on the table, is that correct? But can you leave an amendment on the table and then go ahead and vote on the
It will
main
be leaving
substantive?
all of
You can't.
11
You can't.
11 lying on the table.
11, yes, sorry. Yeah, it would have to be all of 11 because the amendment had.
It will have to be. So we have a procedural motion. from Yako. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it if it is the entire motion of
Yes,
11.
well, it will
because
need to be all of
that's the
11.
way it is.
Yes.
I'll second it.
All right, can I just take a vote on that procedural motion? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. Abstentions? And carried. Thank you, folks. Well, look, we're back. We're on to, for now, onto our place when we get back from lunch. It's now 12:53 or thereabouts. So if we can be back by 1:30, which is that okay? 40 minutes, thank you.